Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to wideawakehorror today. Just want to say, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join the family. And as always, if you like these stories, you know what to do. Smash that like button and let us know in the comments what you think. And as always, enjoy the stories.
I almost didn't go that night, and honestly, that's the part that still bothers me the most. If I had just stayed home and kept scrolling like usual, none of this would have happened. I would have just eaten leftover noodles, watched dumb videos until midnight, and fallen asleep on the couch like I normally do. Instead, I decided it was finally time to meet someone from a dating app in real life. The guy seemed normal. That was the whole reason I agreed to meet him. His name on the app was Ryan. Not a weird username, not some edgy profile photo with sunglasses and a motorcycle. Just a regular picture of a guy smiling in a park. Brown hair, clean hoodie, normal looking face. The kind of guy you would pass in a grocery store and not think about twice. We had been messaging for around a week. Nothing intense. Just random stuff about school, music, bad cafeteria, food, the usual things people type when they don't know each other yet. What made me trust him was how normal everything felt. He didn't rush anything, didn't ask creepy questions, didn't try to move the conversation somewhere weird. Eventually, he suggested dinner at this small burger place about 20 minutes from where I live. Not a fancy place, just one of those casual spots with neon lights and old movie posters on the walls. The kind of place where people hang out after late classes. I told my friend where I was going just in case, which is something everyone always says you should do. I even sent her his profile photo. She replied with a thumbs up and said he looked harmless. So yeah, everything seemed fine. I got there a little early and grabbed a booth near the back. The place smelled like grilled onions and fries. There was a basketball game playing on a TV above the counter and a couple sitting 2 tables away arguing quietly about something. Then Ryan walked in. I recognized him right away. Same face as the photos. Same brown hair. Same green hoodie from one of his pictures. He spotted me almost instantly and smiled like we had known each other for years. We sat down and started eating, and it honestly felt like one of the most normal first dates ever. He was funny in a relaxed way, not the type who tries too hard. We talked about dumb things like the worst movies we had ever seen, and how every math teacher seems angry all the time. There were moments where he knew things I didn't remember mentioning in the chat, but I just assumed I forgot. Like he knew the name of my old dog. He knew I hate tomatoes. He even knew I almost failed chemistry last year. At first I thought maybe I had told him those things while messaging and just didn't remember. It happens. But there were a couple moments that stuck out. One time he brought up a story about when I was 9 and I fell off a bike behind my grandmother's house. I froze for a second because I didn't remember ever telling that story online. Not to him. Not to anyone recently. It was just a random childhood thing. I laughed it off though. I figured maybe I mentioned it once and forgot. The dinner kept going and everything still felt normal. Until the door opened again. I noticed him because he walked in and immediately looked straight at our table like he was already looking for someone specific. At first, I thought it was just another customer. Then my brain did that weird slow thing where it takes a few seconds to catch up with what your eyes are seeing. Because the guy standing by the entrance looked exactly like the one sitting across from me. Same height. Same hoodie. Same hair. Same face. Even the way he walked was the same. He moved toward our table and my brain kept trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that maybe they were twins, but that didn't make sense because the one sitting across from me had never mentioned having a twin. The second guy reached the table and sat down in the empty seat next to me like he belonged there. My stomach dropped. Both of them were now looking at each other with the exact same confused expression. The guy across from me leaned forward slightly like he was about to say something. The new guy leaned back in his chair and stared at him like he was annoyed. I looked from one to the other and my brain started racing. They both had the same tiny scar on the chin. They both had the same watch on their left wrist. Even the way they'd blinked looked the same. The new guy pulled out his phone and slid it across the table toward me. On the screen was our chat history from the app. Same messages. Same profile picture. Same name. Ryan. The guy across from me then slowly pulled out his own phone. Same chat. Same account. I remember feeling like the air in the room got heavy, like the whole place suddenly felt smaller. Neither of them was laughing. Neither of them looked like they were joking. They both just kept looking at each other and then at me. Then things got worse. The guy on my left started listing things about me. Not loud exactly, but quietly enough that only I could hear. Details about my life that I never told anyone online. Things from years ago. My old locker number from middle school. The time I got lost at a state fair when I was 7. The name of the street my dad used to live on before he moved away. I felt my chest tighten. Before I could even process that, the guy across from me started doing the same thing. More details. More memories. Stuff that wasn't public anywhere. My childhood dentist. The first email address I ever made. The name of the stuffed animal I slept with until I was 10. Both of them knew everything. It wasn't like they were guessing either. They were calm, certain. I started thinking maybe this was some insane prank. Maybe someone hacked my accounts or something. But there was no way they could know half the things they were saying. And the strangest part was that neither of them seemed surprised about the other knowing it. They just looked irritated. Like two people arguing about who got somewhere first. The guy across from me leaned forward and pointed slightly toward the other one with a look that basically said he didn't belong there. The other one just shook his head slowly and looked back at me like he felt bad for me. My brain was screaming to get out of there, but my legs felt stuck. I kept studying their faces for differences. Anything. But there weren't any. Then the guy sitting across from me reached for my drink without looking and took a sip. The guy next to me grabbed the exact same glass at the exact same time. Both of them paused. Both of them looked confused. Then they both looked at me again. That was the moment I realized something even worse. They weren't copying each other. They were reacting to the same thought. Like they both expected that glass to be theirs. The tension at the table was getting noticeable. The couple nearby had stopped arguing and were now staring at us. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it. Then something really disturbing happened. The guy across from me slowly turned his wrist and looked at his watch. The guy next to me did the same movement half a second later. Not like imitation. More like a delay. That tiny delay made my skin crawl. It was like watching a video buffering in real life. The guy next to me suddenly looked uncomfortable. He rubbed the side of his head and stared at the other one like something was wrong. The other guy looked completely calm. Too calm. Then the calm one reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded receipt from the restaurant. It had the time printed on it. It was from 20 minutes before I'd even arrived. The other guy looked at it and his face slowly changed from confusion to something else. Something like panic. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. People around us started watching. For a second, the two of them just stared at each other. Then the one who had been sitting next to me walked straight out of the restaurant without looking back. The door slammed behind him. Everything went quiet. The guy across from me relaxed back into his seat like nothing strange had just happened. He picked up a fry from the plate between us and kept eating, like dinner was still happening. I sat there frozen for another minute before grabbing my bag and leaving. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't even follow me outside. When I got home later that night, I opened the dating app. Ryan's profile was gone. The next morning, I had a notification. New match. Same photo. Same name. Ryan. Same green hoodie. And the first message was already waiting. Do you want to grab dinner tonight? I noticed the first name while sitting in the bathroom of a gas station about 10 minutes before my date, and at the time I thought my phone was glitching. It sounds stupid now, but that is honestly what I thought. Just a weird bug or something. My contacts list had a name in it that I definitely never saved. I was leaning against the sink scrolling through my phone because I was early. The place was one of those highway stops outside town with bright lights and vending machines that barely work. I had stopped there because the restaurant we planned to meet at was a few miles down the road and I didn't want to arrive too soon. Anyway, I was checking my messages when my thumb slipped and opened the contacts app. At the top of the list was a name I didn't recognize. Marlon West. I remember staring at it for a few seconds trying to remember if it was someone from school or maybe someone I met through a group chat or something. But the weird thing was there was no number saved with it, just a name. No photo. No email. Just a name. I scrolled through the rest of my contacts and everything else looked normal. Friends, family, the pizza place near where I live, the guy who fixed my car once. So I figured maybe I accidentally created it somehow. Phones do weird things sometimes. I deleted the contact and didn't think about it again. Then I drove to the restaurant. The place we picked was a lakeside grill about 30 minutes outside the city. Kind of a chill spot with wooden tables and a big patio that overlooks the water. In the summer it gets packed, but this time of year it was pretty quiet. I had never met the girl before that night. Her name was Layla. We matched on a dating app about 4 days earlier. Her profile looked normal. She had a few photos. One by the lake, one sitting on the hood of a car, one selfie where she was smiling like she was laughing at something off camera. Nothing weird. She seemed funny when we were messaging too. Not dry like most people on apps. She actually typed full sentences and didn't answer everything with one word. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw her right away. She was sitting on the wooden railing near the entrance looking out at the water. And honestly, she looked even better than the pictures. Brown hair, kind of wavy, with a green jacket and black jeans. She looked relaxed, like she had been there a while, just enjoying the view. When she noticed me walking over, she smiled like she already knew it was me. From the start, everything felt really easy. Some first dates are awkward, where both people are trying to figure out what to say, but this one wasn't like that. It just flowed. We got a table near the window and ordered burgers and fries. The lake outside was dark except for a few lights reflecting on the water from houses across the shore. She was funny in this kind of quiet way, but she would say something completely random that would catch me off guard and make me laugh. At one point, she told a story about getting locked inside a supermarket after closing when she was younger. The way she explained it was so casual that it sounded almost normal. I remember thinking that the whole night felt really perfect. Like the kind of date people always talk about, but rarely actually have. About 20 minutes in, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out just to check the notification. It was nothing important, just some random app update. But when I closed it, my thumb accidentally opened the contacts list again. And that's when I noticed another name. At the very top. Brandon Pike. I froze for a second. Same thing as before. No number. No email. Just a name. I frowned at the screen trying to remember if I had added it somehow earlier. Maybe while deleting that other contact at the gas station. But I didn't remember typing anything like that. I quickly deleted it again. When I looked up, Lila was staring at me with this curious smile like she was waiting for me to finish whatever I was doing. I slid the phone back into my pocket and we kept talking. The night kept going. More random stories. More laughing. At one point she asked about where I grew up and I told her about the town where I used to live before moving here. She seemed genuinely interested in everything. After we finished eating, we decided to walk down to the dock behind the restaurant. The lake was really calm that night. No wind. Just the sound of water moving slowly against the wooden posts. We leaned against the railing and talked for a while. I remember thinking that I hadn't felt that comfortable with someone in a long time. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my friend Jake asking how the date was going. I unlocked my phone to reply. And that's when I saw it again. Another new contact. Even Doyle. My stomach tightened. Same thing. No number. No details. Just a name sitting there like it had always been in my list. I felt this weird confusion building in my head. 3 random contacts in one night made no sense. I deleted the name again and tried to ignore it. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. While we were walking back toward the restaurant, I secretly opened my browser and typed the first name I remembered. Marlon West. The search results loaded. The first thing that popped up was a local news article from a few years ago. A short one. About a car accident. A guy named Marlon West who died late at night on a rural road about an hour from where we were standing. I remember my chest tightening a little when I read that. It was probably just a coincidence. Lots of people shared the same names, but for some reason I decided to check the second one. Brandon Pike. Another result. Another short news article. Different year. Different location. Same type of headline. A man found dead in his apartment late at night. At that point, my brain started racing. 2 random names from my phone, both connected to deaths. It felt way too strange to ignore. But the third name bothered me the most. Even Doyle. When I searched that one, the article that popped up was only a few months old. A drowning in a lake. Not far from where we were. I slowly lowered the phone. The water behind the restaurant suddenly felt darker. Leela was walking a few steps ahead of me along the dock. She turned back toward me with that same relaxed smile. For a second, I just stood there staring at her. Then my phone buzzed again. I hesitated before looking, but I checked it anyway. Another contact had appeared. This time the name made my stomach drop. It was my name. Just my first and last name sitting at the top of the list. No number. No details. Just like the others. I looked up slowly. Leela was still smiling at me. The lake behind her was completely still. That night, I went home early. I told her I wasn't feeling well. She seemed disappointed, but didn't question it. When I got home, I opened my contacts list again. My name was still there. Right under it was a new one. Leela Mercer. I searched that name too. There were no results. I did not believe people who say a single night can ruin how you think about the world forever. That always sounded dramatic to me. People love telling scary date stories online like they almost died just because someone talked too much or chewed loudly. But something happened to me last fall that still messes with my head when I sit in a quiet room. I keep replaying it like a video I cannot pause. The worst part is that everything she said actually happened. Every single thing. And the first weird part started before we even sat down. I met her through an app like most people do now. We talked for about a week. She seemed normal. Maybe a little serious, but still normal. Her photos looked real, not like those profiles where every picture looks like a modeling shoot. She had a simple smile and short dark hair. We agreed to meet at this small restaurant outside town. Not a fancy place. More like one of those family spots next to a highway where truck drivers stop at night. Yellow lights, old booths, the smell of grilled food always stuck in the air. I got there a few minutes early because traffic was lighter than I expected. The sky was already dark, and the parking lot lights were buzzing with bugs flying around them. I remember sitting in my car for a minute checking my phone and wondering if this was going to be another awkward dinner where we run out of things to talk about. Then I saw her walking across the parking lot. She walked slow, not nervous slow, more like someone who already knew where everything was. When she reached the door, she looked directly at my car for a second, even though I had not told her what I drove. That detail stuck with me later. We went inside, and the place was about half full. Families, a couple older people, 2 guys watching sports at the counter. Normal stuff. We got seated at a booth near the window. And for the first few minutes, everything felt completely normal. We ordered drinks, talked about basic things. Where we grew up, the usual small talk people do when they meet for the first time. She was quiet, but not in a rude way. More like she listened carefully before answering anything. Then the first thing happened. Right in the middle of her telling me about a job she used to have, she suddenly looked past me toward the kitchen area and said the waiter near the counter was about to drop a glass. It sounded random enough that I almost laughed. Then maybe 2 seconds later, I heard the crash. Everyone in the restaurant turned toward the counter. One of the waiters had dropped a tall glass while setting drinks on a tray. It shattered all over the floor. For a second, I thought she must have seen it slipping or something before I did. But she'd been looking at me when she said it. We both glanced over at the mess and then back at each other. She looked completely calm, almost bored. I joked about her predicting the future. She did not really react. About a minute later, she looked toward the door and casually said someone was about to sneeze behind me. Before I could even turn around, someone at the table directly behind us let out a loud sneeze. Like one of those huge ones people cannot stop. I remember laughing awkwardly because it felt like a weird coincidence. 2 predictions in a row. Not impossible, but strange. She just kept sipping her drink like nothing unusual had happened. A few minutes later, she said the lights were about to flicker. That one really got my attention, because the restaurant lights actually did flicker about 5 seconds later. Not fully turning off. Just a quick dim and right again. A couple people looked up at the ceiling, but then went back to their food. I sat there staring at her, trying to figure out if she was messing with me somehow. Maybe she had been there earlier and knew the lights did that sometimes. Maybe she heard something electrical buzzing before it happened. I I kept trying to explain it logically in my head. But then it kept happening. She predicted a phone ringing at the counter. It rang. She mentioned a kid near the back dropping fries on the floor. 30 seconds later, the kid started crying while his fries were scattered under the table. Each time she said something, she sounded casual, not dramatic, like she was mentioning the weather. The part that bothered me most was how early she said things. It was not 1 second before. Sometimes it was 10 seconds. Sometimes longer. Long enough that you start thinking about it while waiting for it to happen. And then it does. By the time our food arrived, my brain was already trying to keep track of everything she predicted. At one point, I counted 7 things in a row. 7. That is when the night stopped feeling funny and started feeling wrong. I started watching her face carefully every time she looked around the room. She never looked surprised when things happened. She looked like someone watching a movie they had already seen. Halfway through the meal, she suddenly checked the clock on the wall above the counter. Then she looked back at me and said something that made my chest tighten instantly. She said I was going to die in 11 minutes. And she said she was just there to watch. The way she said it was calm, almost polite. Not like a joke. Not like a threat. More like someone explaining a schedule. I waited a second expecting her to laugh or say she was kidding. Nothing. She just kept eating like it was a completely normal sentence. My brain went through every possible explanation. Maybe it was dark humor. Maybe she wanted to see my reaction. Maybe this was some kind of social experiment thing people film for videos. But she did not have a phone out. No camera. Nothing like that. I remember glancing around the restaurant, suddenly feeling like every person in there was watching me. But nobody was. They were all doing their own thing. She looked back at the clock again and said quietly that it was 10 minutes now. My stomach dropped. I told myself this was stupid. People do not predict death down to the minute. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound that came out of my mouth did not sound real. She kept eating slowly, completely relaxed. I started paying attention to everything around me. The kitchen noise. The door opening when new people walked in. Cars passing outside the window. Every sound suddenly felt important. After maybe 2 minutes, she mentioned that the guy at the counter was about to spill ketchup on his shirt. 10 seconds later, it happened. I watched a red stain spread across his white shirt while he cursed under his breath. My chest felt tight. She looked at the clock again. 8 minutes left. I started wondering how someone could even plan something like this. Was she going to poison me? Was someone outside waiting? I checked my drink glass like it might suddenly look different. She predicted another thing. A car alarm going off in the parking lot. About 15 seconds later, a car alarm started screaming outside. That sound made something inside me snap. I told myself I was leaving. This whole thing was insane. But before I even moved, she said something else. She said I would not make it out of the parking lot. She sounded almost disappointed, like she wished the timing worked better. I stood up from the booth anyway. My legs felt weird, like they were slightly numb. I pulled my wallet out and dropped a few bills on the table without counting. I did not care about the exact number. I just wanted to get outside. As I walked toward the door, I could feel her watching me. Not turning around somehow felt harder than running. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cold air. The parking lot looked normal. Cars parked in rows. Streetlight buzzing overhead. My car about 20 steps away. I started walking fast. I remember thinking if nothing happens in the next minute, then she was just messing with me. I reached my car and unlocked it. The clock on the dashboard lit up when I opened the door. 6 minutes. I sat there breathing hard, trying to calm down. For a second, I actually started feeling stupid. Maybe she guessed something random and I freaked out. I started the engine. Then I heard the screech. It came from the road just outside the parking lot. Loud tires sliding across pavement. I turned my head toward the sound. Headlights were coming straight toward the entrance. Too fast. Way too fast. The last thing I remember clearly is the shape of a truck sliding sideways across the road like the driver had lost control. After that, everything is kind of blank. I woke up later in a hospital room. Apparently, the truck had smashed through the edge of the parking lot and slammed into the row of cars. Mine included. The doctor said I was lucky I had just gotten inside instead of standing next to the car. The part that still keeps me awake sometimes is what the nurse told me the next morning. She said a woman had come to the hospital asking about me shortly after the crash. Dark hair. Quiet. She waited in the hallway for a while, then left before anyone could ask who she was. The weirdest part of this whole thing is that the date itself was actually going really well at the start. Like surprisingly well. The kind of night where you think maybe the dating apps are not completely useless after all. But now when I think back on it, I realize the first sign something was wrong happened before we even ordered food. And at the time I completely ignored it. I met her downtown at this open night market that pops up on weekends near the old train station. It is basically a bunch of food trucks, string lights, folding tables, and people wandering around eating things from paper trays. It gets crowded, but in a fun way. Music playing somewhere, people laughing, that kind of energy. I got there first and spent about 10 minutes pretending to check my phone while actually just watching people walk past. Then she showed up. She looked almost exactly like her photos. Same dark curly hair, same bright jacket, same smile. Nothing weird about her at all. We hugged quickly like people do when they are not sure if they should hug or not. Then we started walking through the food stalls trying to decide what to eat. It felt easy right away. We joked about some of the food prices being ridiculous. One place was selling a tiny grilled sandwich for $14, and we both laughed about it like that was some kind of crime. We eventually got tacos from a truck near the end of the row and found an empty table. And honestly, for the first 15 minutes, it felt like one of the best first dates I had been on. Until the first stranger walked up. He was an older guy, maybe mid-60s, gray beard, baseball cap, one of those jackets with too many pockets. He walked right up to our table and looked directly at her. Not at me. Just her. I assumed maybe they knew each other somehow. Maybe a family friend or something. But then he said something that completely confused both of us. He said he was sorry for what he was going to do to her tomorrow. Then he walked away. That was it. No explanation. No smile. Nothing. Just walked straight back into the crowd. For a second, we both sat there, kind of frozen. Then we laughed. Because what else do you do when a random stranger says something that weird? We joked that maybe he had mistaken her for someone else. She even turned around to see if he was still nearby, but he was already gone. So we shrugged it off. But then about 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time it was a woman, maybe early 30s. She looked nervous as she walked up to the table. Again, she looked straight at my date and said she was sorry about tomorrow. She said it quickly like someone ripping off a bandage. Then she left just as fast. No explanation again. No conversation. Just gone. The smile on my date's face faded a little after that. Mine probably did too. We tried joking about it again, but it did not land the same way. Two strangers in a row saying something like that starts feeling less random. I started thinking maybe this was some weird prank. Maybe someone she knew was messing with her. Maybe a group of friends nearby thought it would be funny. So I scanned the crowd around the market. Nothing looked unusual. People were eating, talking, walking around like any normal night. My date kept looking over her shoulder every so often, trying to spot if anyone else was heading toward us. About 10 minutes passed before the third person approached. This one was younger, maybe around our age. A guy wearing a delivery backpack like the ones food drivers use. He stepped up to the table and stood there awkwardly for a second. Then he apologized to her for tomorrow. His voice sounded serious, not like someone joking around. He said it like he actually meant it. Then he walked off. I remember the exact moment when the mood completely changed. Before that, we were confused. After that, we were uncomfortable. 3 strangers. All saying almost the exact same thing. All about tomorrow. My date tried to laugh again, but it sounded forced. She asked me if I knew any of them. I did not. Not even slightly. We started trying to come up with explanations. Maybe there was some kind of social media challenge happening. Maybe someone had mistaken her for a person involved in something. Maybe it was some weird performance art thing happening at the market. But none of those explanations really fit, especially because every single person looked genuinely serious. They were not laughing. They were not filming us. They weren't even sticking around to see our reaction. They just apologized, then disappeared back into the crowd. We got up from the table after that. Neither of us really felt like finishing the food anymore. We started walking toward the other side of the market where there were fewer people. I remember thinking maybe changing locations would stop it. Maybe those people had just been around that one area. For a few minutes, nothing happened. We walked past a stand selling handmade candles and another selling vintage jackets. The air smelled like fried food and smoke from one of the grills. I started convincing myself the weird part of the night was over. Then someone tapped my date lightly on the shoulder. It was a teenager, maybe 16. He looked like he worked at one of the stalls because he was still wearing an apron. He looked nervous and kept glancing around. Then he apologized to her for tomorrow. Same exact thing again. Then he walked away before we could ask anything. This time neither of us laughed. My date looked genuinely unsettled. She asked me if this was some kind of setup. Like maybe I had planned this as a joke. I told her I had absolutely nothing to do with it, which was true. I was just as confused as she was. At that point, we decided to leave the market completely. The parking lot was a few blocks away past the train station. We started walking there together. The streets were quieter once we left the crowd. Just a few cars passing by and the distant sound of music from the market. For a moment, it actually felt normal again. Then someone sitting at a bus stop bench stood up as we walked past. It was a middle-aged woman holding a grocery bag. She stepped toward my date, looked directly at her, and apologized for tomorrow. Then she sat back down like nothing happened. I remember looking at my date and seeing that she was actually scared now. Not just confused. Scared. Because at that point, it had happened 5 times. 5 different strangers. None of them connected to each other. All saying the same thing. All about tomorrow. We reached the parking lot shortly after that. It was mostly empty except for a few scattered cars and the flickering lights above the rows. We stopped near her car. Both of us standing there not really sure what to say. Then a security guard from the station started walking across the lot. He noticed us standing there and nodded politely as he passed. Then he stopped, turned around, walked back toward my date, and apologized to her for tomorrow. 6. That was number 6. I remember the silence after he walked away. The kind of silence where your brain feels like it is running in circles trying to catch up with reality. My date unlocked her car. She looked like she wanted to leave as fast as possible. Before getting in, she said she was going to look into whatever this was when she got home. Maybe find something online that explained it. I stood there while she got into the driver's seat. She started the engine. Then she paused. For a moment, she just stared forward through the windshield. Then she slowly stepped out of the car again and walked over to a newspaper vending box near the edge of the lot. The kind where you put coins in and pull the door open. She opened it, pulled out a paper, and started looking at the front page. Her face changed almost immediately, like someone had drained the color out of it. She handed the paper to me. The headline was about a traffic accident that was going to happen the next morning near the highway exit outside town. The article listed several people expected to be involved based on scheduled routes and vehicles. One of the names was hers. I did not notice it right away. That is the part that bothers me the most when I think about it now. The sign was there almost from the beginning, but my brain just brushed past it like it was nothing. If I had paid attention earlier, maybe the whole night would have gone differently. Instead, I kept telling myself I was just tired or imagining things. The night started pretty simple. I matched with her on an app a few days before. We talked a little bit, mostly about random stuff like movies and how boring our jobs were. Nothing strange about the conversation. She seemed normal and funny in a quiet way. We decided to meet at a bowling alley on the edge of town. It sounds like a weird first date idea, but it is actually perfect because if the conversation dies, you can just focus on the game. Less pressure. The place was one of those older bowling alleys that has been around forever. Faded carpet, neon lights over the lanes, arcade machines buzzing the corner. The kind of place that smells like pizza and cleaning spray at the same time. I got there first and rented the lane. When she walked in, I noticed 2 things immediately. First, she looked almost exactly like her photos. Second, she had this calm look about her, like she was not nervous at all. Most people on first dates seem a little tense, but she looked completely relaxed. We started bowling and talking about random things. It was actually fun. She was terrible at bowling, which made it funny because she kept laughing every time the ball drifted slowly into the gutter. Nothing about her seemed strange. She was easy to talk to, and she had this quiet smile that made the night feel comfortable. About 20 minutes and I went to grab drinks from the vending machine area near the entrance. That's when I first noticed something odd. There was a big mirror behind the snack counter, the kind that lets you see the whole room behind you. When I looked up while grabbing the drinks, I could see her reflection standing by the lane behind me. She had just finished throwing the bowling ball and was turning back toward the seating area. But her reflection was slightly behind her movement. Not much, just a little. Like a video that lagged for half a second. I blinked and looked again. Everything looked normal. She was sitting down tying her shoe. I told myself I probably just moved my head too fast or something. So I grabbed the drinks and went back. The rest of the game went fine. We laughed about how bad we both were and talked about where we grew up. She told me she had moved around a lot when she was younger because of her parents' jobs. Nothing weird. Until the second time. This time I noticed it on the shiny ball return machine between our seats. Those things are polished enough that they reflect light and shapes pretty clearly. She stood up to grab the bowling ball, and I happened to glance down at the reflection while she moved. Her reflection stood up slightly after she did. Again, it was tiny. Maybe half a second. But once you notice something like that, your brain locks onto it. I kept watching carefully while pretending to look for my ball. When she reached forward to grab it, the reflection copied the motion just a moment late. Not by much. Just enough to feel wrong. I stood there staring for a second, trying to figure out if the curved metal was just distorting things. She asked if I was ready for the next frame, and I snapped out of it. I told myself it had to be the angle or lighting. Curved surfaces mess with reflections all the time. So we kept bowling. After that, we moved to the small diner area inside the building to grab food. The place had red booths and old framed photos of bowling teams from like 30 years ago. The table we got seated at was directly across from a big window that showed the parking lot outside. Because it was dark outside, the window acted like a mirror. I did not realize that right away. We were halfway through eating fries when I looked up and saw both of our reflections in the glass. That is when the third time happened. She leaned forward to take a fry from the basket. In the reflection, she leaned forward slightly later. Again, just a moment. But it was clear. Clear enough that I stopped chewing for a second. I watched her carefully while pretending to listen. Every time she moved, the reflection caught up right after. Like the glass was buffering. I remember telling myself there had to be a logical reason. Maybe the lighting inside was causing a weird effect. Maybe my brain was just tricking me because I was already thinking about it. I even tested it by lifting my own hand quickly. My reflection moved instantly. No delay. Perfectly normal. I felt a cold, uncomfortable feeling building in my chest. So I started watching her reflection more than her actual face. It kept happening. Small movements. Turning her head. Lifting her drink. The reflection always just a fraction behind. It was so subtle that if you were not looking for it, you might miss it completely. I debated telling her, but I knew how insane that would sound. Imagine telling someone on a first date that their reflection is lighting behind them. So I stayed quiet. After dinner, we decided to walk outside for a bit before leaving. There was a small lake behind the bowling alley with a wooden path around it. The water was calm and dark. Street lights reflected on the surface like long glowing lines. We walked side by side talking about random stuff again. I kept trying to ignore the reflection thing. Convinced myself it was just my brain messing with me. Then we reached a spot where the lake was completely still, like a sheet of glass. The reflection of the two of us was clear in the water. I slowed down. My heart started beating faster, because the reflection in the water was doing the same thing. She stopped walking. The reflection stopped half a second later. She turned her head toward me. The reflection turned a moment after. There was no curved metal. No weird lighting. Just calm water. I stared at the reflection longer than I meant to. Something inside me felt heavy and wrong. Then the worst part happened. She looked down at the water. So did the reflection. But the reflection did not stop moving. It slowly lifted its head again, even though she had not moved, and the reflection smiled. I remember the exact moment my brain stopped trying to explain things, because the woman standing next to me was not smiling at all. Her face looked neutral, maybe even slightly tired, but the reflection in the water had this wide, slow grin, and it was looking directly at me. I stepped back without thinking. The reflection stayed there for a moment longer. Then it slowly copied her neutral face again, catching up. She asked if everything was okay. I could barely answer. I said I suddenly remembered something I had to do early the next morning, which was the first excuse my brain could grab. She seemed a little confused, but did not argue. We walked back toward the parking lot. I tried not to look at any reflective surface the entire way. No windows. No car mirrors. Nothing. When we reached the cars, we said goodbye quickly. She got into her car and drove away. I stayed there for a minute, breathing slowly, trying to calm down. Then I walked toward my own car. As I passed the dark window of the bowling alley entrance, I accidentally glanced at the reflection. Mine was normal, standing there, breathing. But next to me in the glass was her reflection, standing a few feet away, smiling again, even though the parking lot behind me was completely empty. The part that keeps replaying in my head is how calm he looked when he said it, like he was telling me the weather or pointing out something on the menu. If he had looked scared or dramatic, maybe the whole thing would have felt like a joke. But he did not. He looked completely serious, like someone explaining a fact that had already happened. And the weird thing is, the night started normal enough that I almost forgot about it at first. I matched with him online after a few weeks of scrolling through the usual profiles. Most people on those apps either try way too hard or barely say anything at all. He seemed somewhere in the middle, quiet but friendly. We talked for a few days. He mentioned he liked late-night diners and long drives. Nothing unusual about that. Honestly, it sounded kind of nice compared to the usual bar dates. He suggested meeting at a small diner outside the city near the highway. I actually knew the place already. It is one of those spots that stays open all night with bright lights and a huge menu. Truck drivers stop there all the time. So one Friday night, I drove out there. The parking lot had that familiar look of a late-night diner, half full of cars, neon sign buzzing above the door, the smell of fried food drifting out every time someone opened it. I walked inside and spotted him right away standing near the entrance. He looked pretty much like his photos. Tall, dark hair, thin face, kind of serious looking, but not in a bad way. We said hello, and then the host started leading us to a table. That is when the first strange moment happened. The host tried to seat us near the front window like they usually do, but he immediately stopped walking. He pointed toward the back corner of the diner where there was a booth against the wall. He said he wanted that one instead. The host hesitated because someone had just left and the table had not been cleaned yet. There were still plates sitting there, but he insisted. Not in an angry way, just very firm. So the host shrugged and said we could wait a minute while they cleaned it. While we stood there waiting, I asked why that booth specifically. There were plenty of empty seats around the place. That is when he said the sentence that changed the entire night. He said quietly that the reason was because that was the booth where I'd kill him. At first, I honestly thought I misheard him. The diner was loud, plates clinking, people talking, the grill sizzling in the kitchen. So I asked what he meant. He repeated it calmly. He said that booth was where I would kill him. Then he looked at me like he expected me to understand. I remember laughing because that is what people do when something sounds completely ridiculous. I figured maybe it was dark humor or some weird icebreaker. But he did not laugh. His face stayed serious. The host finished cleaning the booth and waved us over. He walked straight to it and sat down on the side facing the door. I slid into the other side, still feeling confused, but trying to convince myself he was just joking. Once we sat down, the waitress came over with menus. For a few minutes, the conversation moved on to normal things again, where we grew up, jobs, favorite food. But something about him felt different now. He kept glancing around the diner like he was checking details. The door. the counter, the kitchen window. After we ordered food, I finally asked him about what he said earlier, about me killing him. He sighed like someone explaining something complicated. Then he told me the strangest story I have ever heard in person. He said that about a year ago he had a very vivid dream. Not just a quick dream, but one that felt real enough that he remembered every detail even months later. In the dream, he was sitting in this exact diner, in this exact booth, with a woman he had never met before. He described her appearance in a way that made my stomach drop slowly, because he was describing me. Same hair, same jacket color, even the same small scar near my eyebrow that most people do not notice right away. He said the dream felt like a normal conversation at first, until something happened at the table, something that ended with him dying right there in the booth. He never told me exactly what happened in the dream. He just said the details were very clear. Clear enough that he recognized the diner immediately when we started talking about meeting somewhere. That is why he suggested it. And that is why he wanted that exact booth. Because in the dream, everything happened there. I remember sitting there trying to decide if this guy was messing with me or completely serious. His voice never changed. He explained it like someone talking about a memory. Not a nightmare. Not a joke. Just something that happened. The food arrived a few minutes later. Pancakes for him. A burger for me. We started eating while talking about other things, but the mood felt strange now. I kept noticing small details around the booth. The scratches on the table. The old jukebox against the wall. The window behind him showing the dark parking lot. He seemed strangely calm, like he had already accepted something. At one point he mentioned that in the dream the waitress spilled coffee near the table. About 10 seconds later, the waitress actually dropped a small cup near the counter and coffee splashed onto the floor. We both looked over at the same time. My chest felt tight. He just nodded slowly like something had confirmed his memory. Another thing he mentioned was that a police car would drive past the window. Maybe 5 minutes later, blue lights flashed briefly outside as a patrol car rolled by the diner. After that, I stopped laughing at the story, because even if it was coincidence, it felt too specific. I started noticing how quiet he had become. He was watching the table carefully, like he was waiting for something. I asked him what exactly happened in the dream. He took a long moment before answering. Then he said it happened suddenly. Something on the table became the weapon. He did not know exactly when it would happen, only that it would happen here, in that booth, with me sitting across from him. My mind started running through every object on the table. Forks, knife, coffee mug, ketchup bottle. I suddenly felt very aware of my hands resting near them. I pushed the knife slightly farther away without even thinking. He noticed that movement and smiled in a sad kind of way. Not accusing, just tired, like someone who already knew how the story ended. I started telling him that dreams do not predict real life, that people imagine things all the time that never happen. But the words felt weak even while I said them, because deep down I could feel how strange the situation was. The diner suddenly felt smaller, quieter, like the rest of the room had faded away. A truck driver walked past our booth on the way to the restroom. The jukebox clicked as someone selected a song. Outside, another car pulled into the parking lot. Normal sounds. Normal things. But the tension at our table kept building. He checked the clock above the counter, then looked back at me. He said the timing felt similar to the dream. My heart started beating faster. I remember thinking about standing up and leaving, just walking out and ending the whole strange night. But something about the way he watched the table made me stay, like I needed to see if anything actually happened. A few minutes passed like that. Then the waitress returned to refill our drinks, which she reached across the table of her elbow, bumped the ketchup bottle. It tipped over, rolled toward me. I reached out quickly to stop it before it fell. My hand knocked into the glass syrup container sitting beside my plate. The heavy glass slipped from my fingers and smashed directly into his temple when he leaned forward at the same moment. Everything after that turned into noise and movement. People standing up, the waitress yelling, someone calling for help. I remember staring at the broken glass on the table and realizing what had just happened. He had been right about the booth. I used to think the people who bring weird stuff to first dates were just trying too hard to be interesting. Like the guy who brought tarot cards once with a girl who insisted on showing me ghost videos on her phone the entire time. Usually it just makes the date awkward, and then you both leave and never talk again. So when she said she liked true crime, I honestly did not think much about it. A lot of people like that stuff now. Podcasts, documentaries, shows about detectives and old cases. It is basically normal conversation at this point. What happened that night made me wish she had just talked about boring stuff instead. Because the moment she opened that scrapbook, I realized something was very wrong. The night started pretty normal though. We met at a small coffee place downtown that stays open late for students and people working night shifts. It is one of those places with dim lights and old couches where people sit for hours with laptops. I got there early and grabbed a table near the window. Rain was coming down outside in that slow, steady way that makes the street lights look blurry. People kept running past the window holding jackets over their heads. I remember thinking it was actually a good atmosphere for a quiet date. She arrived about 10 minutes later. She looked exactly like her profile pictures. Long dark hair, oversized sweater, kind of soft-spoken when she said hello. Nothing strange at all. We ordered drinks and started talking like normal people meeting for the first time. She told me she was studying journalism. I told her about my job fixing computers for a small company. It was easy conversation. The kind where you relax a little because it does not feel forced. About 15 minutes in the topic of hobbies came up. That is when she mentioned she was really into true crime. Again, normal. Tons of people are. She said she liked collecting articles and reading about cases that never got solved. I joked that she sounded like a detective. She laughed at that. Then she said she actually brought something she wanted to show me. I assumed it was going to be photos on her phone or something like that. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick scrapbook. Not a small notebook either. A big one. The kind with heavy pages and hardcover. It looked old and a little worn at the edges. She placed it on the table between us. At first, I thought it was kind of cool. Like someone bringing a hobby project. She opened it slowly and started flipping through the pages. Each page had newspaper clippings glued onto it. Articles about murders. Photos of crime scenes. Headlines about missing people. Some of the pages had notes written in the margins. Dates. Locations. Little arrows connecting things. I leaned forward, looking at it out of curiosity. The first thing I noticed was that the articles looked very real. Not printed from the internet. Actual newspaper paper. Yellowish and slightly wrinkled. Some of them had dates from years ago. Others looked newer. She flipped another page and pointed at one article about a woman found dead in a parking garage. There were notes written beside it, connecting it to another article a few pages later. She explained that she liked studying patterns in cases, trying to see how things connected. It sounded intense, but still within the range of someone really into crime stories. Then I noticed something strange. One of the articles had a date that had not happened yet. It was from a newspaper issue supposedly printed 3 weeks in the future. I stared at it for a second thinking I read it wrong. But the date was clear. I pointed it out. She looked at the page and said she knew. She said that one had not happened yet. I waited for her to smile like she was joking. She did not. She turned the page. The next article also had a date in the future. This one talked about a man found dead near a train station in another city. The details looked exactly like a normal news article. Photo. Headline. Location. But the date was 2 months from now. My brain started trying to explain it. Maybe these were mock articles. Maybe she wrote them herself as part of a writing project. That seemed logical. I told myself that had to be it. She kept flipping through pages slowly. Each new article had a future date. Each one describing a different murder. Different places. Different people. Some pages had photos of locations circled with pen. Others had handwritten notes like someone studying a case before it happened. My stomach started feeling heavy because the pages looked too real. The paper looked aged like actual newspaper, not printed copy paper. The font looked exactly like something from a real publication. I asked her where she got them. She just shrugged slightly, like it was not a big deal. Then she said she liked collecting things before they happened. That sentence stayed in my head like a bad echo. Before they happened, she flipped another page, and another. I started noticing that the dates slowly moved closer to the present, like the scrapbook was moving through time. Older cases at the front, future ones near the back. My curiosity slowly turned into something uncomfortable. I kept thinking about how long it would take someone to create fake articles like this. Dozens of them, with photos, detailed writing, all about murders that had not happened yet. It felt like way too much work for a simple hobby. Then she reached the final section near the back. The pages here looked newer, the paper brighter, the dates only days ahead. My chest felt tight without me knowing exactly why. She stopped turning pages for a moment, like she was deciding something. Then she flipped to the very last one. I looked down at the article automatically. The headline talked about a man found dead behind a convenience store. The location was a street only a few blocks away from the coffee shop. The date was tomorrow. For a moment, I just stared at the words trying to process them. Then I noticed something else on the page. A red circle drawn around a name in the article. My name. Not just the same first name. My full name. Spelled exactly the same. My brain completely froze for a few seconds. I checked the rest of the article, hoping maybe it was coincidence. But the description matched me. Age. Job. Even the part about working at a computer repair company. All of it. I looked up at her slowly. She was watching me carefully. Not smiling. Not laughing. Just watching. The rain outside the window sounded louder than before. Cars passed by sending water across the street. The coffee shop felt strangely quiet. I looked back down at the page again just to be sure I was not imagining it. The red circle around my name looked thick and deliberate, like it had been drawn multiple times. I flipped the page back hoping maybe there was another explanation hidden somewhere. But that was the final page. Nothing after it. Just the inside of the back cover. When I looked up again, she was still watching me. Very calm. Like she had been waiting for that exact moment. I remember closing the scrapbook slowly. My hands felt cold even though the room was warm. I said something about needing to leave early. I do not even remember exactly what excuse I gave. I just stood up and walked out of the coffee shop into the rain. I got into my car and drove home without stopping. That was 3 days ago. Yesterday morning, I woke up and checked the news online without even thinking about it. There was already an article about a man found dead behind a convenience store. The location was exactly the same street. The date was yesterday. The name in the article was not mine. But the red circle from the scrapbook is still the only thing I can think about. The strange part is that I almost canceled that date. Not because of a bad feeling or anything dramatic. I was just tired that day and thought about staying home and watching something instead. If I had done that, I probably would never have learned what people in that restaurant thought they knew about me. Sometimes I wish I had stayed home. I met him through an app like most people do now. We'd been messaging for about a week. Nothing weird in the conversation. He seemed funny in a quiet way, and he liked the same kind of movies I do. He suggested meeting at a small restaurant downtown that I had never been to before. I remember getting ready that night and feeling pretty normal about it. Nothing special. Just another first date. The restaurant was in an older part of the city near a row of brick buildings that used to be warehouses. The outside had warm yellow lights and big windows looking into the dining room. When I walked in, the place felt cozy right away. Wooden tables, soft music playing somewhere near the bar, the smell of grilled food and bread. People were talking quietly at their tables and servers moved around carrying trays. He was already there waiting near the front. He looked exactly like his photos. Tall, dark hair, wearing a jacket that looked slightly too formal for the place. We said hello, and the host led us to a table near the middle of the room. The first thing I noticed once we sat down was that a couple people at another table were staring at me. I did not think much about it at first. Sometimes people glance around a restaurant. It happens all the time. So I ignored it. We started talking about normal stuff. Where we grew up. What we do for work. The usual first date conversation. He seemed easy to talk to, and for the first 10 minutes I was actually thinking the night might go well. Then I noticed someone else staring. This time it was a woman sitting at the bar. She was not just glancing. She was looking directly at me with a very strange expression. Her eyes were wide and her mouth slightly open, like she had just seen something shocking. When I made eye contact with her, she quickly turned away. I brushed it off again. Maybe she thought she recognized me. That happens sometimes. People mix up faces all the time. A few minutes later, the server came to take our order. While she was writing things down, she kept glancing up at me. Not in the normal polite way. More like she was studying my face. When she finished, she walked away, but turned back once before reaching the kitchen. That was the moment I started feeling a little uncomfortable. I mentioned it to my date jokingly. Said it felt like people kept looking at me. He laughed and said, maybe I just had one of those faces people recognize easily. I tried to relax after that. The food arrived, and we started eating. The conversation kept going normally, but I kept noticing small things around the room. A guy at another table whispering something to the woman next to him while pointing slightly in my direction. 2 teenagers near the door staring openly for a few seconds before one of them pulled out their phone. The server passing by again and slowing down when she looked at me. It felt like a slow ripple spreading across the restaurant. More and more people noticing me. More and more strange looks. Not curious looks. Confused ones. Some even looked frightened. My stomach started feeling tight. I checked my reflection in the dark window beside our table, thinking maybe something was wrong with my makeup or hair. Everything looked normal. So I kept eating, but my focus was completely gone. At one point, I noticed a man sitting alone a few tables away watching me without even pretending to look somewhere else. He had this pale, shocked expression on his face, like he could not believe what he was seeing. I remember thinking maybe there was someone behind me and he was actually staring at them. So I turned around casually. No one there. Just the wall. When I turned back, he was still staring. Then he looked down quickly like he realized he had been caught. The tension in the room kept building slowly. My date seemed to notice it too now. He glanced around a few times and asked if I knew anyone there. I told him I did not. I had never even been to this restaurant before. The music playing in the background suddenly felt louder because the rest of the room had grown quieter. People were whispering. I could feel it without hearing exact words. Then the server returned to check on us. When she stepped close to the table, she looked directly at my face again. This time her expression was different. Not just confused. Disturbed. Like she was looking at something impossible. She did not say anything about it, though. She just asked if the food was okay and then walked away again. After that, the strange looks turned into something even worse. A woman near the back stood up and walked past our table slowly. As she passed, she stared directly at me with a look that felt almost scared. Another person near the entrance pulled out their phone and started typing while glancing over repeatedly. It felt like the entire restaurant was becoming aware of me one by one. Like a wave moving through the room. I started feeling a cold, nervous energy building in my chest. My date asked again if something was wrong. I told him I had no idea why everyone was acting like that. Then the man who had been sitting alone earlier stood up and walked toward our table. I noticed several people watching him like they were waiting to see what would happen. He stopped beside us and leaned slightly closer to me. His face looked pale. He spoke quietly, but his voice was clear enough that I heard every word. He asked how I was there. He said I died last year. For a second, I thought it had to be some kind of terrible joke. But the look on his face was not joking. It was pure confusion. Like he was staring at someone who should not exist. My date looked just as confused as I felt. I asked the man what he was talking about. He looked around the restaurant like he was trying to confirm something. Then he said he recognized me from the news. He said there had been a story last year about a woman who died in a car accident. He said my face was everywhere for a while. Local news, online articles, memorial posts. He said he remembered it clearly because the accident happened only a few blocks from where he lived. My heart started racing. I told him he had the wrong person. But even while saying it, I could see other people around the room nodding slightly, like they were hearing the same thing and agreeing. The server came back over at that moment looking nervous. She asked quietly if everything was okay. The man pointed toward me and said something about the news story again. The server stared at my face for a long moment. Then she slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She typed something quickly. A few seconds later, she turned the screen toward me. It showed an article from last year. The headline was about a woman killed in a late-night car accident near the river bridge. The photo under the headline was my face. The exact same face I see in the mirror every morning. Same hair. Same scar above my eyebrow. Same smile. The article listed my name. My age. Even the street where I used to live before moving last spring. The date of the accident was exactly 1 year ago next week. I remember staring at the phone for a long time while the room stayed completely quiet. Everyone around us was watching now. Some people looked scared. Others looked like they were trying to figure out if they were seeing a ghost. I handed the phone back slowly. My hands felt numb. Because the truth is I did move here about 11 months ago. And I never told anyone from my old town where I was going. I should have known something was off the moment we walked in. The place looked completely normal from the outside. Lights on, windows showing people moving inside, the usual smell of fried food and coffee. But the second we stepped in the door, everything felt wrong. We had met online like most people do now. We talked for a few days, exchanged a few texts, and it seemed easy enough. He suggested a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and cheap coffee that tastes like burnt sugar. I had never been there before, but it was close to my apartment, so I agreed. The host led us to a booth near the middle of the dining room. I noticed immediately that the other tables were full. At least it looked full. Couples eating, a few people sitting alone reading phones, a guy at the counter sipping coffee. Nothing weird at first glance. We sat down and started talking, small talk about work and movies and the weather. I ordered a burger. He didn't order anything. He just sat there staring at the menu for a long time before sliding it aside. At first, I thought maybe he was just nervous, like a lot of people on first dates. But the longer the minutes passed, the more I realized he wasn't just hesitating. He wasn't going to eat anything at all. The waitress came over with our drinks, and he barely touched his glass. I tried to ignore it, figuring maybe he wasn't hungry. The food arrived, the smell filling the booth, and he didn't even pick up his fork. He just stared at the plate, blank expression, like it wasn't there. I started to feel a little uncomfortable. This was the first date I had been on, but something about his stillness was unnerving. I asked if he was okay, and he nodded without speaking. The diner itself started to feel different as I watched him. I noticed the people at other tables again. Only this time, the more I looked, the stranger it felt. They weren't moving naturally. Their chewing was slow and mechanical. Conversations sounded muted, like the ambient sound had been turned down. The man at the counter didn't lift his coffee cup to his mouth. It stayed hovering halfway. I leaned back in the booth and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I just noticed him not eating and my brain started to fill in details. I told myself to relax. Then I realized something. The waitress came back to check on our table, walking past the other booths. She passed a couple talking, and I swear their heads didn't move. She passed a man on his phone, and his hands froze mid-swipe. The sound of cutlery clinking against plates wasn't following the rhythm of real eating anymore. It was off. I glanced at him across the table. He was still staring at his plate, calm, like nothing was happening. I started to look around more carefully. The people in the booths weren't just still sometimes. They were completely unmoving. Their eyes glazed over. The fries in their hands stayed suspended in the air as if someone had paused a video. My heart started racing. I tried to speak to him, asked if he noticed it too, but he still didn't answer. He just looked at me with this strange calmness, like he already knew. I got up to walk around, thinking maybe I needed to see for myself. The moment my feet left the booth, it became undeniable. The diners were dead. I could see it in the slackness of their faces, the unnatural tilt of their heads, the way their bodies weren't reacting to anything real. Their drinks weren't being sipped, food wasn't being chewed, but it all looked frozen in a very lifelike way. The waitress finally looked at me. Her eyes were wide, but there was no panic. She stepped back slowly, then whispered something that made my stomach drop. She said the only reason anyone in the diner was still moving was because of him sitting across from me. I froze. I glanced back at him, trying to find any hint that he was joking, but his face was calm, placid, almost patient, like he was waiting for me to figure it out. I stumbled back to the booth. He looked down at the plate again, still not touching it. My mind raced. This had to be a hallucination. It had to be some sort of weird prank, but nothing about the diner made sense anymore. The static stillness of everyone else screamed a truth I didn't want to accept. He finally spoke, not with words, but somehow it was clear. I understood without hearing. He wasn't eating because eating implies living. The others, everyone else in the diner, weren't alive. It hit me then, the weight of it, the way the light reflected off the empty eyes, the frozen gestures, the subtle decay in their skin. This place had been normal for anyone else, but for me, I could see it. I was the only one alive. I looked back at him, desperate for some explanation. His gaze met mine, calm as ever, and that's when it became obvious. He had been here before. He knew what it looked like, what it felt like. Maybe he had done this before with someone else. Maybe he had been waiting for me to notice. I backed out of the booth slowly. The restaurant felt bigger now, the air heavier. I could hear a distant hum, like the sound of the fridge in the kitchen or a generator somewhere, but no chatter, no normal life. He finally lifted his hand, just a little, pointing toward the door. It was like a gesture of instruction, of patience. He wanted me to leave. Maybe he wanted me to understand before I did. I grabbed my bag and ran to the exit. The rain was falling harder outside, cold and relentless. I looked back at the windows as I ran down the sidewalk. Through the glass I could see the diner perfectly normal again, people moving, laughing, drinking coffee. But I knew it was real. I knew what I had seen inside. I got home and locked the door behind me. I still can't stop thinking about it. The images of the frozen diners keep coming back. The way he had stayed calm through it all. The fact that I could see the truth and no one else could. I don't know if I'll ever go on another first date, or if I even want to. Because I know now that sometimes the normalest looking places hide something you're not supposed to see. And sometimes the person sitting across from you knows exactly why. I never thought a first date could feel like time had been rewritten. Usually you go out, talk about dumb stuff, laugh at bad jokes, maybe eat too much or spill something on your shirt. That's the usual horror, awkward moments. But that night was different. It wasn't awkward. It was something worse. We met at a small cafe tucked behind a bookstore downtown, the kind of place with low ceilings and exposed brick where everyone pretends to be serious about their coffee. I liked the vibe. Quiet, not too crowded, and the smell of fresh pastries made me feel normal. I got there first, grabbed a table near the window, and watched the rain blur the street outside. He arrived about 10 minutes later, carrying a leather jacket that looked worn but stylish, dark hair slicked back just enough to look effortless. He smiled when he saw me and I did the usual greeting thing. Nothing out of place. We ordered drinks, me a chai latte, him a black coffee, and started talking like two people who were trying to make a first date work. Normal stuff, jobs, hobbies, movies we liked, shows we were binging. At first, he seemed like anyone else. Charming in a low-key way, smart without overdoing it, a little quiet but the right amount. I felt comfortable, like I could actually enjoy myself. Then he said something that made me pause. He mentioned my favorite childhood cartoon, not the obvious ones, the one I used to watch on Saturday mornings before school. He didn't just mention it. He described the exact episode I loved the most, down to a scene where the dog slipped on a puddle and the neighbor yelled something stupid. I laughed, thinking he had picked it up from my social media or something, but the more he described it, the less it felt like something you could just know from internet stalking. Then he started telling me about my first pet, the little hamster I had when I was 7. He described its cage, the color of its bedding, even the tiny wheel that squeaked when it ran. I stopped laughing. He went on. The tree in my backyard that I used to climb, the way my mom used to hang wind chimes from the porch, the exact time my dad left for a work trip when I was 9, and how it rained that day. Every memory he mentioned was perfectly accurate. I started feeling weird, that creeping mix of disbelief and discomfort. It's one thing for someone to know a few things from social media or stories your friends told them. It's another to know things no one could know unless they had actually watched it happen. Then came the moment that made me want to crawl under the table. He leaned back slightly, calm as anything, and said he had been watching me since before I was born. I froze mid-sip, letting the chai latte cool in my hands. My brain tried to laugh it off. He was joking, right? Maybe some creepy attempt at charm. But he wasn't. The look in his eyes was flat, like he wasn't expecting a reaction. He wasn't there to scare me for fun. He was just telling the truth. The cafe didn't change. The rain outside didn't stop. And yet suddenly everything felt heavier. I noticed the way the light reflected off the glass jar of sugar packets on our table, the way the chair legs looked like shadows stretching on the floor. I started noticing the little details that I hadn't before. The faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind the counter. The smell of slightly burnt coffee from the back. He kept talking, calmly and methodically. He described my earliest memories, the ones I barely remembered myself. The first day of kindergarten, the time I scraped my knee falling off a swing, my first crush, the exact pattern of stars I loved staring at on summer nights when I was 10. At first it was like listening to someone read a diary that wasn't theirs, but that started to feel like someone was peeling away the layers of my life, showing me that they had always been there, in the shadows, seeing every little thing, cataloging everything I ever did before I even had the ability to remember. I tried to tell myself I must be imagining it, that maybe it was some coincidence. But how could anyone get that much right? The exact color of my bedroom walls when I was 5, the exact spot where I used to hide snacks in my closet, the tiny ceramic frog on my windowsill that my brother broke and glued back together without telling anyone. Every single one of these things he mentioned without hesitation. My hands started shaking a little. I realized I hadn't touched my drink in what felt like hours. I looked around the cafe, hoping for some kind of distraction, but the room looked normal. People reading, typing on laptops, sipping coffee. The ordinary hum of life continued around us. But I could feel him watching me differently now. Not like a person on a first date, more like someone observing a creature they had always known was coming into the world. He told me how he had watched my parents meet, how he had seen my mom crying when she was pregnant with me, how he had counted my first kick in the womb. It was impossible, terrifyingly impossible, and yet he spoke with such calm certainty that part of me wanted to believe it. I felt my stomach tighten. Every instinct screamed at me to get up, to leave, to run somewhere safe, but my body was frozen. Partly disbelief, partly fear, partly the way he said everything so matter-of-factly. He described moments from my early childhood that my parents never even mentioned to anyone. The way my dad tripped on the stairs the day I was born, the way my grandmother scolded me for drawing on the walls, the tiny scar I got when I fell in the driveway. Every single detail, exact and precise. I tried to look for a way to laugh it off, to make it a story, to tell myself he was a sociopath who had some insane method of remembering everything from people's lives. But the truth pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't move. Then he described moments from before I was born, things I had never thought about, things that technically didn't exist as memories, and yet he spoke like he had been there. My parents' wedding, my dad's first car, a summer they met at the lake, everything, down to the faint smell of gasoline in the air, the way the sun glinted off the water at exactly 3 in the afternoon. I remember finally whispering in my head, maybe out loud, I can't remember that this was impossible. But he didn't flinch. Didn't try to cover it up or make it less scary. He just kept listing facts, calmly, casually, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. The cafe seemed smaller suddenly, the walls closer. The light coming through the window looked harsher, sharper, and every reflection in the glass made me feel like I was being watched from more angles than possible. At some point, I realized I had stopped breathing normally. I was holding my breath just to keep myself from screaming or crying or doing anything that would make him notice my panic. He described me turning 10, turning 15, the first time I left town without my parents, the first day of high school. Every memory perfectly sequenced, like he had a timeline of me in his head, like he had always known how every moment would unfold. I don't know how long we sat there. Time seemed warped. Every sound in the cafe sounded distant, echoing. Every sip of coffee I tried to take felt impossible, like the air itself was thicker than normal. Finally, he leaned back, smiled faintly, and said that everything had been clear to him since the beginning. That he had been waiting, watching, preparing, counting down every day until this first date. My hands shook so badly that I couldn't even hold my cup. I left it on the table and got up, muttering some excuse about needing to go. The cafe door slammed behind me as I ran into the rainy night outside, the cold water soaking through my jacket and hair. Even now, the memories of that night haunt me. I keep thinking about how calm he was, how patient, how perfectly he could describe every single moment of my life, and most of all, how long he had been waiting to meet me. It changed the way I see people. Even now, sometimes when I walk down a street, I wonder who has been watching, waiting, counting the days I don't even remember. I thought I had seen every weird thing a first date could throw at me. Awkward silences, terrible jokes, someone checking their phone too much. That's normal. That's first date territory. But this night, it was something else. Something I can't even describe without feeling my chest tighten again. We met at a quiet little cafe that smelled like roasted coffee beans and old books. It was the kind of place where the tables were so close together you could hear half the conversations around you. But the lighting was dim enough that you didn't notice. I got there first, found a small table in the corner, and waited. I was early the usual jittery feeling in my stomach, thinking maybe this could go well. He arrived a few minutes later, wearing a hoodie that looked soft, dark hair slightly messy, a nervous smile that made him seem approachable. We exchanged greetings, the normal handshake that turned into sitting down, ordering drinks, all standard stuff. At first, the conversation was normal too. Small talk, the usual first date questions. He asked about school, work, hobbies. I answered and asked the same. It all seemed typical. Then she came into the picture. She sat across from me with this calm, knowing look, like she had already decided how the night would go. After a few minutes, she said something that made me stop mid-sentence. She told me she could hear what I was thinking. I laughed nervously at first. That's the kind of thing people say to break tension. Maybe she was joking. But she wasn't joking. She started repeating small things I was thinking. I didn't say them out loud. I didn't move or make a sound, and yet she spoke them. Things like, I hope this latte isn't too hot, or I wish this chair were more comfortable. She said them calmly, almost like she was just reading from a script she already knew. At first it was funny, maybe clever, maybe a trick. I figured I'd play along and see how far it went. Then she started describing more personal thoughts. Thoughts I hadn't spoken to anyone in years. I had completely forgotten them. Memories, fleeting worries, things I didn't even realize were lingering in my head. She repeated them perfectly, word for word, the tone exactly how I imagined it. My heart started to race. This wasn't just clever. This was wrong. It felt wrong in a way that made my stomach twist. I could see the calm certainty in her eyes, the way she didn't hesitate, the way she seemed to be listening in on me like a radio signal. I tried to change the subject, thinking if I distracted her maybe it would stop. We talked about the cafe, the street outside, the weather, anything. But she kept repeating the things I was thinking, even my attempts to think something else. She described them before I even knew what I was going to think. That's when it got worse. She froze for a second, the smile slipping from her face. She went pale, her eyes widening like she was staring at something impossible. She whispered, or at least it felt like a whisper even though no one else was around, that I was thinking something she hadn't expected. I asked her what, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look on her face told me everything. She was terrified, completely unnerved by a thought that had just formed in my head, when I hadn't even really recognized myself. The cafe felt smaller all of a sudden. The walls seemed closer, the shadows stretching across the floor, the hum of the coffee machines turning into a low drone. Everything normal before felt wrong now. I tried to focus on something mundane, thinking if I concentrated maybe it would help me control my thoughts. Pictures on the walls, a poster of a concert I'd never been to, the menu on the counter. But even those thoughts weren't safe. She reacted to them, sometimes before I even fully formed the idea. I realized she wasn't just hearing my thoughts, she was ahead of them. She could see them before they even happened, and the way she reacted told me she saw something dark, something I didn't understand yet. I couldn't eat, couldn't drink. My hands shook so badly I had to set my coffee down. I could feel my pulse in my temples. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to get away, but my body refused to move. She leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just calm, and continued. She described things I hadn't yet considered, fears I hadn't fully recognized, the way I sometimes imagined people disappearing around me, the scenarios I sometimes daydreamed about but never admitted. Then she reacted to something that wasn't even in my thoughts yet. She screamed, not loudly, but with this raw horror, a sound that made the air itself feel heavier. It was a reaction to something that had not existed, something I hadn't conceived. It made my skin crawl and my stomach twist into knots. I tried to look around, hoping someone else in the cafe would notice, would interrupt. but no one was looking. It was like she and I were trapped in a bubble, a separate plane of reality inside a normal-looking cafe. I tried to stand to get away from her, but it felt like gravity was thicker. I stumbled back, chair scraping against the floor, the noise too loud in the quiet. She didn't move toward me, didn't chase me, but her eyes never left mine. The thought I hadn't thought yet started forming, and she reacted again. Terrified, panicked, her lips trembling, eyes wide with fear. I couldn't understand it, couldn't process why. She was the one who claimed to hear my mind, yet even she was shocked by what she glimpsed in the edges of my consciousness. My own thoughts became chaotic, overlapping, impossible to control. Each idea, each fleeting worry, each tiny memory seemed amplified, as if she was reading them all at once. I felt like I was being ripped apart from the inside. My normal memories, my rational thoughts, my random imaginings, all exposed, all visible to someone who shouldn't have been able to know them. Then it got quiet. Not normal quiet, but the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and fills your head. She sat back, breathing heavily, her face pale, her hands on the table, shaking slightly. The cafe around us seemed to pulse, the shadows moving, the hum of the machine slowing. I realized then that she wasn't just hearing thoughts. She was seeing the edges of my mind, glimpsing the potential, the unformed, the things I hadn't yet imagined but might. And whatever she had glimpsed had terrified her. I didn't stay to find out more. I bolted from the cafe, rain hitting my jacket, water soaking my hair, the air cold and electric. I didn't look back until I was several blocks away. The lights inside the cafe glowed normally again, the people moving like they were supposed to, the ordinary hum of life. But I knew what I had seen. The girl who could hear thoughts, who could anticipate what wasn't even thought yet, had seen something in me that I hadn't even realized existed. I still think about that night. When I try to sleep, sometimes I feel the echo of her reaction in my mind, like a warning, like a pulse. And I know that some people are watching parts of us we can't even control yet. I walked up to the little bistro on the corner thinking it was just another first date spot. The neon sign buzzed softly above the door, flickering like it had been there for decades. I had never been inside before, but it looked cozy from the outside, the kind of place where you'd expect regulars to have their own tables. The rain had just stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shiny under the streetlights, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me before pushing open the door. The first thing I noticed was how warm it felt inside, not just the temperature, but the atmosphere. The lights were soft, the smell of bread and roasted coffee comforting. And then the waiter appeared, smiling like he'd been expecting me. He said, "Welcome back," with this warmth that made me pause. I froze for a second. Back. I had never been here before. He waved me forward like it was nothing, completely casual, as if we were old friends returning to our favorite table. My heart thumped in my chest, that weird, uneasy feeling that usually only hits when something is slightly off. I glanced around the room, trying to ground myself. The tables were mostly occupied by other diners, a mix of couples and people sitting alone. Everything seemed normal at first glance. He led me to a booth by the window where the light from the street made everything inside glow softly. I sat down, and the moment I did, another waiter appeared with a drink I hadn't even ordered yet. He set it down in front of me and smiled like he had anticipated my choice. It made me shiver, not from cold, but from the creeping sense that I wasn't seeing the whole picture. The man I was on a date with arrived a few minutes later, laughing slightly, carrying a jacket. He didn't notice anything strange yet, just slid into the booth across from me. I tried to act normal, sip my drink, look out the window. The waiter lingered for a moment, watching us, before nodding and walking away. That's when it started. The small details at first, like the way the host nodded at me as if she remembered every time I'd been there before. She told me she loved seeing me again, that it had been too long. I blinked. I had never been here. How could she know me? I looked around the room, and everyone we passed seemed to recognize me. The chef peeked out of the kitchen, gave a little wave like we had talked before. The busser smiled at me while clearing a nearby table, like he remembered our previous conversations. It was subtle at first, almost normal, but the repetition made my stomach twist. The waiters and waitresses started recalling things. My favorite seat by the window, my usual order a latte with oat milk, even the way I like my eggs scrambled. I tried to laugh it off. tell myself it was coincidence. But every memory they mentioned was wrong and right at the same time, like they had a perfect knowledge of a version of me I had never lived. They started talking about dates I had supposedly had there. Dozens of them. They described people I had never met, conversations I had never had, desserts I had never ordered. Yet they spoke with such certainty that it made me doubt myself. The more they spoke, the more the room felt like it was closing in. The booths, the walls, even the soft hum of the ceiling lights seemed to press closer, suffocating. I kept glancing at my date, looking for a hint that he was seeing this too. He was completely unaware, scrolling his phone, laughing at some meme. It made me feel more isolated, like the whole restaurant was wrapped around me in a secret reality I couldn't escape. One of the waitresses came by and mentioned my last anniversary celebration at the bistro. The wine I had ordered was someone she said I loved. I had never been here with anyone, never celebrated anything in this place. My hands trembled as I set my cup down on the table. The memories she described were so detailed I could picture them perfectly. The lighting, the music, the exact laugh of someone I'd never met. The more they described, the less I felt like the bistro was real. The room started to blur the edges, the ceiling lights flickering just slightly, casting shadows that moved against the grain of the wood paneling. I realized I couldn't focus on the normal things, the people, the decor, even the food. It all felt like a projection, a version of a restaurant built around me. The waiter came back with food I hadn't ordered and apologized for the delay. He told me he remembered the first time I tried the same dish, how I had been nervous about the spice, and how I had smiled when it turned out I loved it. I didn't remember that. It didn't exist, and yet I could see it clearly in my mind like a memory planted there by their certainty. I tried to stand, thinking maybe I could leave and wake up from this surreal reality, but the door seemed farther than it should be, like the restaurant stretched subtly to contain me. Each step I took, a new waiter appeared, recalling another fabricated date, another fake memory. The normal sounds of the cafe outside, the faint traffic, the occasional pedestrian, felt muted, as if the world had pressed in to isolate me here. I felt trapped, surrounded by a staff who remembered me perfectly in ways that had never existed. It was exhausting, overwhelming. Every glance, every smile, every polite nod reminded me that I had no past in this place, but they acted as if I did. It was a history I had never lived, yet somehow I was living it now in real time. My date still seemed oblivious, enjoying his own small talk, completely unaware of the growing panic inside me. I wanted to scream, to tear the walls down, to wake up somewhere else. But the staff continued, remembering every moment that had never happened, recounting conversations, awkward silences, laughs that weren't mine, kisses I had never given. The more they spoke, the more my mind began to crack. The restaurant became a labyrinth of familiar strangers who all remembered me in ways I had never existed. The smell of bread and coffee became sharp, almost metallic. The lighting flickered more, shadows stretching unnaturally. Each step I took felt guided, watched, recorded. I realized I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, had to escape before I lost my sense of self entirely. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly, my heartbeat deafening. The staff looked at me with concern, sympathy, a familiarity that chilled me to the bone. They offered to take my coat, to refill my drink, to make me comfortable. They remembered me too well, knew my habits, my preferences, my fears. I ran for the door, the wooden frame looming impossibly taller than when I had entered. Outside, the night air hit me like a shock. The streets were quiet, wet from earlier rain, neon reflections streaking along the pavement. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was blocks away, my jacket soaked, my hair plastered to my face, lungs burning. I can't forget it. The way they remembered everything, every fake moment, every fabricated date, every memory that had never existed yet was so real in my mind. The bistro had been alive in a way I couldn't touch or explain. Even now, weeks later, I see the flicker of that neon sign in my dreams. I hear the voices recalling things that never happened, guiding me back to a past that isn't mine. And I know somehow that if I ever return, the staff will remember me again, every date, every moment, perfectly whether I exist in them or not. I knew this date was going to be weird from the start, but I didn't think it would be the kind of weird that could actually make your stomach flip and your chest feel like it had been replaced with ice. We picked a small downtown diner, the kind with vinyl boots and cracked tiles on the floor, a place that smelled like frying oil and coffee that had been brewing for hours. It looked normal enough, nothing fancy, nothing pretentious. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, red and blue, and for some reason, it felt like it was watching me as I walked in. We were early, which was fine, because I liked to scope the place out first. The waitress smiled at me and gestured to a booth in the back. My date arrived a few minutes later, this easy casual vibe about him that made me think I could relax. At least I tried. We ordered drinks, settled in, and the small talk began. At first, everything seemed normal. The other diners were eating, chatting, laughing quietly. The staff moved from table to table, the hum of plates and silverware adding a background rhythm to the room. I felt fine, though my gut kept tightening in little bursts, like it was warning me something was off. Then it started slowly. At first, I noticed a guy at the booth behind us, mid-chew, frozen. His fork just hung in the air. At first, I thought it was a trick of my eyes, but then the woman near the counter, holding a menu, didn't blink, didn't move. Her cup hovered halfway to her mouth. I looked around trying to convince myself it was some kind of weird optical illusion. Maybe a camera effect or my brain playing games. But no, everything and everyone was frozen. The waitress walking past our table was mid-step, arm stretched out with a plate. The kid playing with his phone at the corner booth had one finger still hovering above the screen. The diner was alive and dead at the same time, frozen in an impossible, silent snapshot. My heart was pounding, and I could feel my date's eyes on me. He didn't seem alarmed. He just watched me, calm, like nothing had changed. I wanted to ask him what was happening, but my throat wouldn't move. I tried to move my hands, my legs, but it felt like the air itself was thicker, heavier. And then he stood, slow, deliberate, almost casual. The way he moved made it seem like the frozen world was nothing to him, like he was walking in his own space, separate from everyone else. He came around the table, and I could see it then really see it. The diner, everyone frozen, all of it completely under his control. I finally found my voice, or at least my brain trying to make sense of it. My stomach turned, my knees weak. I realized what he meant when he moved through the frozen room with that eerie calmness. The diner, the patrons, the staff, they weren't frozen by chance. They were frozen by him. He leaned against the booth across from me, like he was casually observing a painting. The silence was suffocating. There was no hum, no clatter, no chatter. Even the neon sign outside seemed to pulse slower, softer, like it had been muted along with everything else. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, but my thoughts were racing. I tried to figure out what was happening, why, how. My date's gaze met mine, and it was then I realized the terrifying truth. He was choosing. Choosing what existed in motion and what didn't. Choosing life in stillness like it was nothing. The power radiated from him, subtle but absolute. And then he spoke. The words were calm, even friendly, but they struck me like ice in the chest. He told me time stops for him when he chooses his next victim. I froze, not because the world had frozen, but because of what he just revealed. I had been sitting there, thinking I was safe, thinking I was just on a normal first date. I wasn't. I was already part of whatever he wanted to do, whatever choice he was about to make. The frozen diners, the suspended motions, it was all practice, or perhaps it was the selection process. Every glance, every gesture, every frozen mouth mid-laugh, every cup mid-air, everything was a part of his control. I was next in his calculations, the next piece in the puzzle he had already solved. I tried to slide away to move, but it felt like gravity had doubled. My hands shook violently, sweat prickling the back of my neck. The world around me remained still, frozen in a perfect, unnatural tableau, except for him and me. I was trapped in his private timeline, aware and helpless. He circled the table slowly, calmly inspecting me, as if deciding if I was worthy of the same attention he had given to all the frozen people around us. It wasn't quick. It wasn't hurried. It was methodical, deliberate. I could feel the weight of his decision pressing down, a presence that filled the diner more than the air or the lights ever could. The longer it went on, the more I realized that time itself wasn't stopping for me, only for everyone else. My own mind raced, my thoughts breaking into fragments, spiraling uncontrollably. I saw the frozen faces of the diners, the suspended coffee cups, the silent music of silverware paused mid-clink, and I knew that if he chose me, I would be next in the way only he could define. He paused in front of me, eyes locking with mine, and for the first time, I saw the faintest flicker of anticipation. It wasn't excitement or joy. It was certainty, an unshakable, terrifying certainty that he had all the time he needed, that I had none. My stomach churned as the diner stretched into an impossible eternity around us. The frozen patrons were like statues, perfect and lifeless, and the way he moved through them like it was nothing made me feel like a visitor in a place I wasn't meant to be. I thought about running, thought about screaming, but nothing worked. The air felt viscous, each breath heavy. My mind couldn't focus on escape. I could only focus on him, on the calmness in his gaze, on the control he wielded over reality itself. He leaned in slightly, not threatening, not urgent, but casual in a way that made it even more terrifying. He didn't need to hurry. He didn't need to coerce. His choice alone was enough. The frozen diner, the suspended world, everything existed to amplify his power, to show that he alone dictated motion and life in this little corner of existence. My pulse raced, heart hammering in my chest. It time seemed infinite in this moment. The stillness of the diner, the frozen cups, the silent conversations that had stopped mid-sentence, it all pressed down on me like an invisible weight. I understood then that this wasn't about fear or intimidation. It was about inevitability. He didn't move closer, didn't touch me, didn't need to. His gaze, calm and unwavering, was enough. Enough to make me realize that the frozen world, the choice of the next victim, the suspended life of everyone else, it wasn't random. It was a rhythm, a pattern, a signal that the next step was his alone. And then, just like that, the world snapped back. The diners moved mid-bite, laughter resumed mid-chuckle, silverware clattered, the waitress delivered a plate that should have already been gone. Everything returned to normal, as if no pause had ever existed. Except for me. I was still reeling from the awareness of what had just happened, the knowledge that he had the power to freeze everyone, to choose, to decide in an instant, to stop time for everyone except himself and the next person in line. And I knew without question that he would choose again. The rest of the date went on like nothing had happened. He smiled, chatted, sipped his drink, calm and casual, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process anything beyond the simple fact that I had seen what he could do. Later, walking home in the cold night, I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination, a trick of my mind, the stress of a first date gone wrong. But I knew better. I could still see the frozen diner, the suspended patrons, and the way he had moved among them with absolute certainty. And I knew it wasn't over. I knew he would choose again. I always thought first dates were supposed to be awkward and slightly uncomfortable, but nothing prepared me for this. I met her at a little cafe on a side street I'd never noticed before, one of those places that looked like it had been untouched since the 70s. The paint was peeling in corners, the booths had cracked vinyl seats, and the smell of coffee was strong enough to cling to your hair. It was raining lightly when I walked in, and the neon sign outside reflected in the wet pavement, making the street look like it was smeared with color. She was already there, sitting in a booth near the window, looking at a menu, but her eyes seemed to be scanning the room like she could see through the walls. We said our hellos, shook hands, and slid into the booth. At first, the date was normal enough, small talk about work, hobbies, favorite movies. But I noticed early on that she didn't just seem interested in me, she seemed interested in everything around me, like she was absorbing the air itself and measuring it against some invisible scale. She didn't ask many questions at first, just studied me. Her gaze wasn't friendly, it was assessing, intense, like she was already calculating something I couldn't name. Then she told me she was a psychic medium. Not as a joke, not as a casual aside, just flat out matter of fact. And I laughed it off at first because, well, who believes that stuff on a first date? But the way she looked at me didn't change. It was like she was seeing something I couldn't. I joked that maybe she was reading my mind, and she didn't even respond, just tilted her head slightly and continued scanning the cave. The weirdness started when she began pointing out people around us. Not other customers, not the barista, not the couple in the corner, but ghosts. She described them casually, as if naming colors in a painting. She didn't whisper, didn't act frightened. She just listed them. A man in a brown jacket who tripped on the sidewalk last year, a woman with a locket who fell down the stairs of her apartment building, a young guy in a baseball cap who drowned in a lake. I thought she was joking at first, and then I realized with a sick feeling that she wasn't. Every single one of the descriptions matched local news stories I had read over the past year. I tried to laugh, tried to brush it off, but her eyes stayed on me, steady and unblinking. Then she paused, and her expression changed, just slightly, a shift that made my stomach tighten. She started describing people who hadn't died yet. She pointed to empty space near our table, her voice calm, and described a man in a dark jacket who would choke tonight, another who would trip on steps and crack his skull, a woman who would slip in a shower. Each description was chillingly specific, right down to the sounds they would make and the exact motion that would finish the event. I felt my throat go dry as the thought hit me. She wasn't guessing. She was seeing the future. I tried to change the subject, but every time I did, she drifted back, scanning again, naming names, placing bodies, detailing final moments. I couldn't help but notice she was always watching me. I laughed nervously, telling myself she was just trying to freak me out. But the moments kept coming, each one more precise, more terrifying. She described a man sitting in the cafe 5 booths away from us, describing exactly how he would burn in a kitchen fire tonight. Then she glanced at me, and her eyes sharpened. The next part is what really broke me. She leaned back slightly, still calm, and her voice didn't change tone at all when she said that the ghosts around me weren't random, weren't neighbors or strangers. They were versions of me, people who would die in the same way I would die tonight. And she started describing them slowly, methodically, every detail, the way my hands would move, the sounds I would make, the exact place my body would land. It was like she had watched a replay of my final moments a dozen times, memorized it, and was reciting it to me as if reading a menu. I laughed more out of shock than humor, trying to tell myself I was imagining it. But then she named a location, described a movement, and the chill went straight through me. Every detail lined up with the day I had planned to go home, every small action, every turn I was going to take. It was as if she had reached into my future, pulled me out for inspection, and was showing it to me in the middle of a dinner date. Time in that moment slowed. I watched her, watched the other customers, the rain outside the window, the neon sign reflected on the wet asphalt, and felt the enormity of what she was saying. I realized she wasn't making it up. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't repeating news stories anymore. She was seeing exactly what would happen, exactly how it would end. And it was me she was focused on, me she was seeing. The rest of the date blurred together. She talked calmly, describing one ghost after another, moving seamlessly from strangers to me, each detail hitting with precise inevitability. I tried to excuse myself, tried to leave, but the chair legs caught on the floor. The door seemed farther than it should have been, and it felt like I was being held in place by some invisible force. She never raised her voice, never seemed angry or excited. She just kept talking, scanning, noting, measuring, telling me what I already feared but couldn't process. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. The rain outside stopped, leaving the street slick and mirror-like, and in each reflection I caught flashes of the moments she described, the future reflected back in puddles and glass. I didn't dare move my hands, afraid of signaling her somehow, afraid of confirming the visions. Every detail she had spoken was impossible, and yet I could feel it happening all around me, the same motions, the same patterns, the same inevitability. At one point she smiled slightly, the kind of calm that made it worse, and said that the night would end the same way for all of the shadows she had seen. It wasn't a threat, not in a normal sense. It was a statement of fact, the kind of statement that sinks into your bones and won't leave. I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end, my stomach twist, my chest tighten. There was no denying it. She wasn't trying to scare me for fun. She was just reading the world as it existed and showing me my place in it. After that, I don't remember much about the conversation. I remember looking out the window, watching the neon blur across the sidewalk, watching my own reflection in the glass and noticing it flicker like it wanted to run. I remember the slow dread crawling over my body, the creeping realization that nothing I did would change what she had already seen. She was calm, smiling gently, and the ghosts around me continued to crowd the edges of my vision, whispering possibilities, pointing toward inevitabilities, marking me in ways that were invisible to everyone else but her. The date ended, as first dates do, eventually, though it didn't feel like a normal ending. I paid my share of the bill, left the cafe, and walked down the street. The weight of what she had shown me clung to me. Every shadow seemed alive, every reflection hinted at the inevitability she had described. I didn't know if I had escaped, if I had been marked, or if the future she saw was already set in stone. The horror wasn't in what she said or what she saw. It was in knowing that she could see it, that she could read my death as easily as a newspaper, that she could exist in a space where my fate was open to observation but not influence. That night, the world felt smaller, tighter, impossible to control. And every step I took after the date felt like moving toward an ending I had already glimpsed but couldn't change. And somewhere in the quiet of the city, the ghosts she described followed me, invisible to everyone else but present to me in every shadow, every reflection, every corner I turned. I never went back to that cafe. I don't know her name, but I remember her eyes, her calm voice, and the way she described my death as if it were a familiar story she had told 100 times before. I never believed in premonitions or deja vu until that night. It started off like any other first date. We met at a dim little diner off the main street, me and flickering outside the rain-slicked windows, the smell of coffee and fried food mixing in a way that was almost comforting. He was already seated when I arrived, wearing a hoodie under a leather jacket, scanning the menu but glancing up at me every few seconds with this calm, precise intensity. The kind of intensity that makes you feel like someone knows something about you before you do. I slid into the booth across from him and tried to keep the usual small talk alive, asking questions about work, hobbies, favorite movies, the usual stuff. He nodded, answered in short, deliberate sentences, and then, out of nowhere, he asked me a question that immediately froze me in place. He asked if anyone knew I was here. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some weird icebreaker, but there was no humor in his voice. It was flat, careful, like he was noting my reaction for something important. The next question came moments later. How long before someone notices if I disappear? The words hit me harder than they should have. My chest tightened. I felt a prickle crawl along the back of my neck. It wasn't just the question itself, it was the familiarity. I had seen it before. Not in a book, not in a movie, not on the news. I had dreamt it. I had dreamt this exact scenario for the past 3 weeks, over and over, different variations with the same core, sitting in a booth across from someone who knew too much, someone who asked questions no one should know to ask. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was imagining connections, that my brain was just weaving coincidences together, but the feeling kept clawing at me. He kept asking questions, small and strange ones at first, but gradually more personal. He asked about my routine, about when I usually left my apartment, about who I called if I got home late. Each time I felt like my dreams were unfolding around me, like I was living one of them in real time. My hands were gripping the edge of the table under the weight of this realization, but he didn't notice, or pretended not to. Then came the point where the familiarity became unbearable. He asked if I ever thought about someone watching me without my knowledge, following me in subtle ways, and my stomach dropped. That was the exact thought I had woken up with in one of my dreams the night before. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. I tried to shift in the seat, to distract myself with the menu, but every item, every flickering neon reflection outside, every subtle motion in the diner made my chest tighten. I was trapped in the overlap of dreams and reality, and he was the center of it. I remember noticing the diner itself, how strangely quiet it was compared to the usual hum of diners late at night. The other tables seemed dim, shadows lurking in corners that weren't there when I first walked in. He didn't notice, or he didn't care. He leaned back slightly and asked me if I ever dreamed about a place that looked exactly like this diner, with the same cracked tiles, the same peeling paint, the same flickering lights. My heart was racing, and I nodded slowly, unable to speak, unable to hide the truth. He smiled just a little, the kind of smile that made me feel seen in a way I didn't want to be. As the conversation continued, the questions became more specific. He asked who I lived with, who I trusted, who I would call first if something went wrong. I realized that every answer he expected, every hesitation he noted, matched perfectly with the way I had responded in my dreams. It was like he was reading from a script I didn't know I had written. The diner, the rain outside, the neon signs, the way the waitress moved between tables, all of it was a stage set for something I had been rehearsing unknowingly in my subconscious. Then came the moment that broke me completely. He asked me what I thought about when I was alone, the thoughts I buried, the ones I didn't even admit to myself. And as soon as he asked, the memories of the dreams flooded back, memories of being asked those exact questions, of feeling that same tightening, that same creeping dread. He was asking because he had asked before, and in dreams I had no control over. It wasn't coincidence. He had planted himself in my subconscious, or somehow accessed it, And now he was living the date with me, step by step, as if rehearsing some script that was meant to end in a way I couldn't escape. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't move my hands without feeling like he was noting it, cataloging it, storing it somewhere for reference. The other patrons of the diner blurred into the background. The flicker of neon reflected in puddles outside became a mirror for my thoughts. Every part of me wanted to scream, to run, to leave the diner and forget that this had ever happened, but every instinct was muted by the weight of inevitability. The questions, the calm voice, the knowing gaze. It all told me that nothing was random here, nothing was coincidence. He had been here before in my mind, and now he was here in reality, playing out the exact same scenario. I started to notice small patterns, tiny repetitions that I had ignored before. The way he brushed his hand against the table, the way he tilted his head, the subtle nods he gave to himself after each answer. Each motion was familiar, like it had been repeated in the dreams a dozen times. I realized that every question was a marker, every pause a checkpoint, every gesture a rehearsal for something larger, something terrifyingly precise. The rain outside slowed, then stopped, leaving a sheen over the streets, reflecting the neon lights in sharp, fractured lines. The diner felt suspended, the world holding its breath. He continued asking, his voice calm, measured, unshakable, while I felt the threads of reality unraveling around me. I was trapped in an intersection of past dreams and present events, and every moment was a reminder that he had been here before, in my subconscious, asking the same probing, impossible questions. When the check came, I realized I had barely noticed him ordering, barely noticed the waitress moving, barely noticed the other sounds of the city beyond the diner walls. All I could hear was the echo of his questions bouncing in my mind, overlapping with the dreams that had haunted me for weeks. Stepping outside, the neon reflected on the wet sidewalk seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, each flicker a reminder that the date was only the latest iteration of something that had already played out. I walked home slowly, feeling eyes in every shadow, hearing the echoes of questions in my own thoughts. I kept replaying the dinner in my mind, every pause, every tilt of his head, every calm, precise question. The familiarity was unbearable, like living inside someone else's plan, someone who had known me before I knew myself. I don't know if he had been real in the dreams or if the dreams had been a warning, but the weight of recognition never left me. That night, and the nights after, I kept dreaming the same date again and again, like I was stuck in a loop where the questions repeated endlessly. And in each dream, he waited for my answer, calm, precise, knowing exactly what he wanted from me, and I was powerless to stop it. The diner, the rain, the neon, the exact words, all of it pressed into me, marking me, reminding me that what had happened wasn't just a date. It was a rehearsal, a preview, and I was living the aftermath. I never thought I'd end up sitting in a tiny, dimly lit diner at the edge of town, staring at someone who felt both familiar and completely impossible. It was raining, the kind of rain that smears neon signs into blurry streaks on the pavement, and the smell of fried food mixed with wet asphalt filled the air. I had met her on a dating app, something casual at first, a simple plan to grab coffee, but she suggested the diner instead. She said it had character. I didn't think much of it until I saw her sitting in the corner booth, calm, precise, with this almost unnatural poise, like she had been waiting for me longer than she could possibly remember. I slid into the booth across from her, feeling the tension in my shoulders immediately. It wasn't just first date nerves. There was something off. The way she tilted her head, the way her eyes seemed to lock onto mine, observing and calculating without a flicker of hesitation. She smiled faintly, and I felt my chest tighten. The air between us was heavy, but not in a normal way. It was thick with anticipation, like the diner itself was holding its breath. The first part of the date was almost normal. We talked about music, movies, minor things from our lives. But every time I mentioned something specific about myself, she repeated it back with a clarity that was unsettling. Not just repeating words, but showing an understanding of me that no stranger could possibly have. When I laughed at a story about my childhood, she smiled knowingly, and I had the sudden, disorienting thought that she already knew every punchline before I even spoke. It was a subtle, creeping sense that I was being watched in a way I couldn't comprehend, as if she had been studying me for months, years, maybe longer. As the conversation went on, I noticed tiny irregularities in the diner. The waitress moved in a jerky, almost staccato rhythm. The neon flickered at odd intervals, and the rain outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Every time I glanced at the clock on the wall, the hands would shift slightly backwards, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make me feel off kilter. My stomach tightened. I tried to focus on her, on the conversation, but the world felt layered, like I was watching two versions of reality at the same time, one normal and one wrong. Then she did something I'll never forget. She leaned back slightly, fingers tapping the table, and said something that stopped my thoughts entirely. She mentioned the last time she had been on a date like this. Only she said it as if it had happened many times before, in detail, recounting things I hadn't told her yet. My chest felt like it was caving in. She described the jokes I would make, the drinks I would order, the way my hand would hover over the salt shaker before I grabbed it. She described the nervous tick in my eyebrow, the faint scar on my knuckle, everything, and she said it with a casual calmness that made my heart pound. The diner started to feel smaller. The walls seemed to breathe in and out with her movements. The rain outside stopped, leaving the windows perfectly still, reflecting the two of us like we were the only things in existence. My thoughts started to race, connecting pieces of my unease that didn't make sense. She wasn't human. Not really. There was no normal explanation for the way she knew me, for the repeated patterns that had been playing out tonight as if rehearsed, for the way the environment itself seemed to bend subtly around her presence. By the time the check arrived, I was nearly frozen. She didn't look nervous, didn't fidget, didn't even glance at it. She sat back, eyes calm, almost predatory, and smiled at me. And then she said it. I can still hear it in my head, even now. This one went better than the last 6 timelines. I froze. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Timelines. The word slammed into my brain like a hammer. 6 timelines. She'd run this date before. Multiple times. Each one slightly different, and I was part of the latest iteration, the one that hadn't ended badly, yet. I tried to ask what she meant, tried to wrap my mind around the fact that this stranger had been living versions of this date before I even sat down. She didn't seem impatient, didn't act like she was rushing to explain. She just smiled that same precise, measured smile and said calmly that in the others, I had figured out she wasn't human. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, to run, to tear the door open and escape the diner before she could do whatever she was capable of. But something held me there, rooted to the booth. The realization that she wasn't human didn't feel like the first warning. It felt like the final confirmation of everything that had been creeping beneath the surface. Everything in the strange familiarity of the booth, the rain, the neon, the diner, the repeated questions, the way she already knew the answers to my thoughts and movements. I started to notice the little details more, the subtle inconsistencies in her behavior. When she smiled, the corners of her mouth didn't quite match the movement of her eyes. When she reached for her drink, her reflection in the window lagged behind her hand by a fraction of a second. When she blinked, the air around her seemed to shift, like reality was accommodating her movements. I wanted to scream, to call the waitress, to leave, but the words caught in my throat. I realized she wasn't testing me with questions anymore. She was observing, noting, cataloging, replaying scenarios she had already mastered across multiple attempts. Time itself began to feel unreliable. The hands of the clock ticked forward and backward. The neon outside flickered in a rhythm that made my stomach twist, and the subtle echo of previous dates seemed to vibrate through the walls. Every heartbeat, every breath, felt like it had been lived before, and I had been trapped in a loop where I wasn't the one in control. She was orchestrating everything, running timelines like experiments, refining her approach, and tonight I was the subject of her current iteration. We left the diner together, the streets slick with rain, the reflections of neon lights slicing through puddles at our feet. I kept expecting her to vanish, to flicker like she did in the window reflections, but she walked normally, perfectly human, perfectly precise. The unease didn't fade. Every step echoed with the knowledge that I was just one of several attempts, that she had run this night before, that she had learned from my reactions and those of other versions of me to perfect her approach. I couldn't stop noticing the subtle changes in the world around us, the minor details she seemed to control. Streetlights glowed brighter as she passed, shadows shifted slightly in her wake, and the rain, though gone moments ago, began to fall again in patches, as if reality was compensating for her presence. It was a controlled chaos that she moved through with the ease of someone who knew exactly where all the threads of reality were tangled, and how to pull them without breaking anything. We ended up outside of my apartment. She didn't ask for anything, didn't insist, didn't reach for my hand. She just looked at me, calm, measured, and smiled once more. And then she said it again, softer this time, like a casual observation that carried the weight of inevitability. In the others, you figured out I wasn't human. I swallowed hard. The world felt heavier, slower, and possible. The diner, the rain, the neon, the repeated questions, the familiarity. It all made sense now. She wasn't human. She was something beyond that, something that could replay nights, manipulate time, observe and learn from iterations that I could barely comprehend. And I was left with a horrifying knowledge that tonight had only gone well because I hadn't realized the truth soon enough. She left me there on the sidewalk, and the streetlights flickered in sync with my heartbeat. The air smelled of wet asphalt and neon, and for hours I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even blink without feeling the echo of her presence behind my eyes. The weight of all those other timelines, all the versions of myself she had encountered and observed, pressed down on me like a living thing. I understood finally that I hadn't just been on a first date. I had been part of an experiment, a rehearsal, a controlled observation across multiple realities, and the current version of me was lucky. Lucky because I hadn't realized she wasn't human until the night was ending. Even now, days later, I keep checking reflections, watching shadows, noticing small irregularities in the way people move around me, wondering if she's running the next timeline somewhere I can't perceive, adjusting, observing, perfecting her approach again. The thought makes my stomach twist, my chest tighten. The world feels slightly off balance, slightly less reliable, and I know it will never feel normal again. I didn't even know why I agreed to go out with him in the first place. He was charming in that low-key, too smooth way that made you suspicious instantly, but there was something magnetic about him, like a slow pull I couldn't resist. He told me he knew this hidden speakeasy that nobody else had heard of, tucked behind an unmarked door in a dead alley, and I thought, why not? It sounded cool, mysterious, fun. I had no idea what I was stepping into. We walked down the alley, a city alive around us with the usual hum of cars and muffled voices, until we reached a door that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The kind of door that seems like it's hiding something terrible or magical. He knocked in a pattern I didn't recognize, a soft rhythm that felt like it belonged to a language I couldn't understand, and the door creaked open slowly. The air inside smelled like old wood, damp stone, and something faintly metallic that made my stomach twist. The place was smaller than I expected, like stepping into a room that shouldn't exist in the city. Dim amber lights hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows on the walls, and the music was muted, jazzy, like it was coming from a faraway radio. People moved around with a quiet precision that was immediately unsettling. They wore masks, masks of every kind, but as my eyes adjusted, my stomach sank. They weren't just masks. They were masks of me, my face. Every single one. Perfectly lifelike, down to the tiny scar on my knuckle and the dimple I hated. They stared at me. Silently, impossibly still. I froze. I could feel my heart hammering so loudly it might as well have been a drum line. He smiled at me calmly, like everything about this was normal, and led me deeper into the room. The mask didn't move except to shift subtly, just enough to make me feel watched from every angle. There were dozens of them, all of my own face, all of my expressions frozen in that strange, uncanny way that made me want to look away but also impossible to ignore. I tried to laugh it off at first, told myself this was some kind of avant-garde art thing, some creepy performance, but the laughter got caught in my throat when I realized they were all facing me. Every mask was turned in my direction, eyes locked on me. The air felt heavier, charged with this impossible anticipation, like they were waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't know, but the panic started building in my chest. He poured me a drink, still smiling calmly, and I could barely focus on it. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but when I moved toward the door, the whispering started. Soft at first, like the hum of wind through cracks in the walls, then louder, closer. I realized it wasn't the wind, it was them. The masked versions of me, whispering my secrets. Things I had never told anyone, things I had tried to bury even from myself, spoken in low, chilling tones. They described moments I had tried to forget, trivial embarrassments, dark thoughts, private desires, fears I hadn't even admitted to myself. Every word made my stomach twist tighter. I turned to him, trying to gauge if he could control it, if this was some twisted game, but he just smiled, calm, like he was enjoying the unfolding horror. He didn't even look at the masks, didn't acknowledge the whispering. It was like I was alone in this nightmare, except I wasn't, and that made it worse. I started to run toward the door, and the whispers intensified, overlapping in a terrible chorus. They knew everything. They knew the little things I thought only I remembered. My first kiss, the lie I told my parents when I was 13, the exact moment I had betrayed someone I loved. Each secret they whispered felt like it was being carved into my skin, marking me in a way that wouldn't heal. I stumbled, looking around frantically, and realized the door I had entered through was gone. The wall was solid, smooth, unbroken. There was no exit. He reached out, touched my shoulder lightly, and I felt my knees almost buckle. The calmness of him, in contrast to the chaos of whispering masks, made my brain short-circuit. I wanted to scream, to hit, to fight, but my voice felt swallowed by the room. The masks didn't move physically, but their presence was overwhelming, and the voices were relentless. They knew everything, and their attention was suffocating. I wanted to close my eyes, but when I did, the whispers grew louder, sharper, like my own mind was attacking me. I tried to focus on him, tried to anchor myself in something real, and he walked closer, calm, deliberate. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why. Why these masks? Why the whispers? Why my face? And then it clicked in a horrible instant. This wasn't about him or even about me. It was about control. He had lured me here to a place that existed out of time, or maybe in some warped version of reality, where the only thing that mattered was my fear, my identity, my secrets. I tried again to move toward the walls, hoping maybe there was a hidden exit, something, anything, but the whispers followed, murmuring faster now, overlapping, repeating, intensifying. They started naming people I loved, places I had been, moments that felt distant, calling out tiny inconsistencies in my life, things I had never admitted to anyone. And suddenly the fear wasn't just about being trapped. It was about exposure, about every fragment of me being broadcast in this room filled with my own face, every mask a witness, every voice a judge. He didn't intervene, didn't calm them, didn't explain. He just watched me with that impossible calm, that same unnerving smile, like this was all part of some process I was supposed to endure. I realized then that the masks weren't alive in the normal sense, but they were extensions of his will, extensions of some power I couldn't even comprehend. The room itself seemed to bend to his intention, shaping itself around my fear, amplifying it, echoing it back at me until I couldn't tell where I ended and the masks began. I tried to scream, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. The masks leaned, subtly, unnaturally, toward me. Their eyes, my eyes, followed my every twitch, every breath. I could feel every secret they whispered crawling across my skin, sinking into my bones. The air was thick, heavy with the sound of my own life repeated back at me in a distorted, unbearable echo. Every whisper was a memory, a confession, a truth I had tried to hide, and now it wasn't mine anymore. I stumbled back against the wall, and my head felt like it was splitting. The whispers were relentless, now a rising tide of my own life crashing in on me. My hands covered my ears, but the sound penetrated anyway. It was everywhere. I realized I didn't know if I was in the real world anymore. The floor beneath me, the ceiling above me, the dim lights, even him, it all felt like it could vanish at any moment, leaving only the masks and the endless, endless whispering. Minutes or hours passed. I couldn't tell which. Time had no meaning in this place. Every mask, every voice, every whisper etched itself deeper into my consciousness. My identity felt fractured, split into dozens of versions of me all staring back, all whispering, all accusing. I wanted to leave, to run, to smash something, to wake up, to anything, but the door wasn't there. There was never going to be a door. Finally, when I couldn't take any more, when the panic was at its peak, he touched my arm. That single touch cut through the chaos for a fraction of a second, enough for me to glimpse the absurdity of it all. The masks, the whispers, the hidden speakeasy, it wasn't random. It was curated, designed for me, by him, to bring me here, to break me down, to watch. The calm of his presence in contrast to the madness of the room was what made it so unbearable. He wasn't human in the normal sense, and I wasn't going to escape without him allowing it. I blinked, and the masks seemed to shift ever so slightly, like they were breathing, alive in a way they shouldn't be. The whispers didn't stop. They've only paused long enough for me to realize the truth. I had never been alone. I had never been safe. And the moment I understood that, I also understood that leaving wasn't about walking out the door. It was about surviving what I had seen, carrying it with me, and pretending the room had never existed. Eventually, he guided me out. The alley was quiet. The rain had stopped. The city moving like nothing had happened. But the memory of that room, the masks, the whispers, the knowledge that every secret I had was there, held and observed, stayed with me. Every reflection I passed in the days after, every crowded room, every whisper in my head reminded me of that night. It was impossible to forget, and I could never go back to the feeling of safety I had once known. I never expected a first date to feel like stepping into a glitch in reality. It started normal enough. She met me at a small cafe near the edge of the city, casual, unassuming, the kind of girl who smiled easily and made it feel like the world slowed down just a little when she was near. I thought I was ready for a normal night, something simple and easy to forget by morning. But by the time we left the cafe, I had no idea the night would rewrite everything I thought I knew about the world. We walked through streets I knew well, the sidewalks damp from a rain that had stopped hours earlier. The air smelled like wet asphalt and old coffee, comforting in its familiarity, and yet I felt a subtle tension I couldn't place. There was something about her gaze, calm, too calm, that made me uneasy. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just first date nerves, but the feeling lingered like a shadow at the edge of my vision. The first thing I noticed was the clocks. I saw one on a shop wall, ticking lazily. Then another at a building across the street. Then the neon numbers of the train station. Every single one was frozen at 11:11. The second hand didn't move. The minute hand didn't move. Even my phone, which I checked reflexively, said 11:11. I stared at her, thinking maybe this was some weird joke. Maybe she had manipulated the time somehow, some strange performance art I had stumbled into. She smiled, quiet and unreadable, like she was waiting for me to understand something I wasn't ready for. We kept walking, and no matter where we turned, every clock, every watch, every screen showed the same. The city felt wrong, the familiar streets suddenly alien, frozen mid-movement. Cars were parked at odd angles, a pedestrian frozen mid-step, a pigeon in mid-flight, wings extended unnaturally, as if the world had paused and forgotten to resume. My heart started racing, a tight coil of panic winding up in my chest. I wanted to ask her what the hell was happening, to make sense of it, but her expression stayed calm, almost amused, as if she already knew exactly what I was thinking. She led me to a small square with a fountain that looked like it hadn't worked in years. Even the water, usually bubbling softly, hung frozen in midair, droplets suspended as though gravity had given up for a moment. I touched one carefully, expecting it to feel wet, to run through my fingers, but it was solid, weightless somehow like glass. My stomach churned. The air itself seemed heavy, thick, vibrating with a quiet hum I hadn't noticed before, a resonance that made my teeth ache. I realized slowly that nothing was moving except her. The leaves of the few trees in the square didn't rustle. No distant horns, no footsteps, no murmurs of other people. The city had been drained of life, and she was the only thing animate. She laughed softly, almost imperceptibly, and I felt the sound reverberate through the stillness like a bell in an empty hall. I tried to process it, tried to rationalize what I was seeing. A dream, a hallucination, maybe some mass experiment, something, anything that could explain it. I glanced at her again, and she tilted her head, smiling wider now, and whispered, but the sound didn't move her lips. It seemed to bloom directly in my mind. That time wasn't broken, I was. I stopped dead in my tracks. My legs refused to move even as my brain screamed to run, to do something, anything. The sensation was like staring down a tunnel with no end, realizing the tunnel itself was inside me, and that every step I had taken in my life, every moment I thought was mine, was somehow a part of this pause, this suspension. I could feel it stretching out in all directions, fingers of stillness brushing against my skin, whispering truths I wasn't ready to hear. She moved closer, calm and deliberate. I could feel the pull of her presence, an almost magnetic insistence that I stay. My mind tried to rebel, to force logic into the chaos, but the city around us was a vacuum of normalcy, and I was suspended in it like a fish caught in glass. Every clock, every frozen second, pressed down on me, and the realization hit that my perception, my sense of time itself, had been warped. I had walked into a world where I was the anomaly. She gestured toward the street. In the frozen traffic, a child was mid-step, a coffee cup hanging in the air above a man's hand, a dog's tail rigid and straight. She moved among them, stepping between frozen people as though navigating a painting, unaffected by the stasis. Every movement she made was deliberate, measured, and impossible to ignore. My eyes darted from her to the frozen world around me, and I understood slowly, painfully, that the city had become her canvas, and I was trapped inside a painting she had already composed. I felt the seconds stretch, thick and viscous. My phone buzzed, an alert from a friend I hadn't spoken to in weeks, and the tiny vibration against my palm felt unreal, wrong, as if the sensation belonged to someone else. She smiled again, tilting her head, and in that moment I realized something worse than the frozen city. This wasn't just some pause scene. I had been placed here deliberately. I was the only variable, the only thing that didn't belong to the natural order of the city. The panic turned to something deeper, a gnawing understanding that I couldn't escape. No matter where I turned, the clocks remained at 11:11. I walked in circles, my own footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. Even breathing felt intrusive, as if the act of existing in this paused world was a trespass. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her answer, but she stayed steps ahead, serene, untouchable, like she was conducting some ritual I had stumbled into by accident. I tried to think of time, to measure it, to find a sequence or pattern, but every reference point was gone. The sun in the sky hung frozen, clouds suspended mid-drift, the shadows unmoving on the pavement. Even the wind didn't exist. My mind, trained for seconds and minutes, hours and days, scrambled uselessly. I realized I didn't know how long we had been here, or if the concept of duration mattered anymore. She had rewritten it. We reached a bridge, the river beneath frozen, shimmering like a sheet of black glass. She stopped at the railing, looking down at her reflection in the impossible surface, and I felt a weight settle in my chest. The world was still, but my pulse was frantic, hammering in my ears. I wanted to run, but there was no direction, no escape, only her calm presence and the knowledge that the universe as I knew it had ceased to function correctly around me. I understood then that the clocks, the frozen pedestrians, the suspended vehicles, everything around me were a malfunction. They were a warning, an explanation, a statement. My perception, my life, my place in time had been altered. She had paused the world to make me see myself, or rather, to reveal that my understanding of reality was fragile, inadequate. And in that understanding, I felt the terrifying, almost unbearable weight of my own existence. She turned to me finally, her eyes clear, unblinking, and smiled that same calm smile, and I understood what she had meant. Time wasn't broken. I was. The revelation wasn't accompanied by fear or anger, only an unsettling clarity. I had walked into a world where my life was no longer a steady sequence of moments, but a suspended tableau in which every second belonged to her, and my own comprehension had been peeled away layer by layer until I was raw and exposed. I didn't move. I couldn't move. She reached out, brushed a hand against mine, and the city felt normal for a fraction of a second, like a mirage of time returning. But when I looked up, the clocks were frozen at 11:11 again. The frozen traffic, the frozen pedestrians, the suspended leaves, all reminders that the world I knew had been replaced by a version designed to reveal me, my fragility, my brokenness in ways I could never fix. She guided me back through the empty streets, past frozen cafes, unmoving street vendors, stopped bicycles mid-fall. The night stretched endlessly, and I understood that no one else would notice the difference. No one would ever see the city like this, because I was the anomaly. The hum of stillness pressed against me as we walked, and every step I took was heavier, laden with the knowledge that reality itself had conspired to make me understand something I didn't want to. We reached the cafe again, the familiar glow of its lights a cruel contrast to the frozen chaos beyond its doors. She smiled, and for a moment the city felt almost alive again, though I knew it was an illusion. I stepped back into the normal rhythm of life outside, the traffic flowing, pedestrians moving, clocks ticking, and yet the 11:11 from the streets I had walked lingered in my mind, etched into me. I knew I couldn't explain it, couldn't prove it, couldn't share it. The day ended, she walked away, and the city returned to its mundane pulse, leaving me alone with a sense of brokenness that would not fade. I noticed the first name while sitting in the bathroom of a gas station about 10 minutes before my date, and at the time I thought my phone was glitching. It sounds stupid now, but that is honestly what I thought. Just a weird bug or something. My contacts list had a name in it that I definitely never saved. I was leaning against the sink scrolling through my phone because I was early. The place was one of those highway stops outside town with bright lights and vending machines that barely work. I had stopped there because the restaurant we planned to meet at was a few miles down the road and I didn't want to arrive too soon. Anyway, I was checking my messages when my thumb slipped and opened the contacts app. At the top of the list was a name I didn't recognize. Marlon West. I remember staring at it for a few seconds trying to remember if it was someone from school or maybe someone I met through a group chat or something. But the weird thing was there was no number saved with it, just the name. No photo. No email. Just the name. I scrolled through the rest of my contacts and everything else looked normal. Friends, family, the pizza place near where I live, the guy who fixed my car once. So I figured maybe I accidentally created it somehow. Phones do weird things sometimes. I deleted the contact and didn't think about it again. Then I drove to the restaurant. The place we picked was a lakeside grill about 30 minutes outside the city. Kind of a chill spot with wooden tables and a big patio that overlooks the water. In the summer it gets packed, but this time of year it was pretty quiet. I had never met the girl before that night. Her name was Layla. We matched on a dating app about 4 days earlier. Her profile looked normal. She had a few photos. One by the lake, one sitting on the hood of a car, one selfie where she was smiling like she was laughing at something off camera. Nothing weird. She seemed funny when we were messaging too. Not dry like most people on apps. She actually typed full sentences and didn't answer everything with one word. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw her right away. She was sitting on the wooden railing near the entrance looking out at the water. And honestly, she looked even better than the pictures. Brown hair, kind of wavy, with a green jacket and black jeans. She looked relaxed, like she had been there a while, just enjoying the view. When she noticed me walking over, she smiled like she already knew it was me. From the start, everything felt really easy. Some first dates are awkward, where both people are trying to figure out what to say, but this one wasn't like that. It just flowed. We got a table near the window and ordered burgers and fries. The lake outside was dark except for a few lights reflecting on the water from houses across the shore. She was funny in this kind of quiet way, but she would say something completely random that would catch me off guard and make me laugh. At one point, she told a story about getting locked inside a supermarket after closing when she was younger. The way she explained it was so casual that it sounded almost normal. I remember thinking that the whole night felt really perfect. Like the kind of date people always talk about, but rarely actually have. About 20 minutes in, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out just to check the notification. It was nothing important, just some random app update. But when I closed it, my thumb accidentally opened the contacts list again. And that's when I noticed another name. At the very top. Brandon Pike. I froze for a second. Same thing as before. No number. No email. Just a name. I frowned at the screen trying to remember if I had added it somehow earlier. Maybe while deleting that other contact at the gas station. But I didn't remember typing anything like that. I quickly deleted it again. When I looked up, Lila was staring at me with this curious smile like she was waiting for me to finish whatever I was doing. I slid the phone back into my pocket and we kept talking. The night kept going. More random stories. More laughing. At one point she asked about where I grew up and I told her about the town where I used to live before moving here. She seemed genuinely interested in everything. After we finished eating, we decided to walk down to the dock behind the restaurant. The lake was really calm that night. No wind. Just the sound of water moving slowly against the wooden posts. We leaned against the railing and talked for a while. I remember thinking that I hadn't felt that comfortable with someone in a long time. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my friend Jake asking how the date was going. I unlocked my phone to reply. And that's when I saw it again. Another new contact. Even Doyle. My stomach tightened. Same thing. No number. No details. Just a name sitting there like it had always been in my list. I felt this weird confusion building in my head. 3 random contacts in one night made no sense. I deleted the name again and tried to ignore it. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. While we were walking back toward the restaurant, I secretly opened my browser and typed the first name I remembered. Marlon West. The search results loaded. The first thing that popped up was a local news article from a few years ago. A short one. About a car accident. A guy named Marlon West who died late at night on a rural road about an hour from where we were standing. I remember my chest tightening a little when I read that. It was probably just a coincidence. Lots of people shared the same names, but for some reason I decided to check the second one. Brandon Pike. Another result. Another short news article. Different year. Different location. Same type of headline. A man found dead in his apartment late at night. At that point, my brain started racing. 2 random names from my phone, both connected to deaths. It felt way too strange to ignore. But the third name bothered me the most. Even Doyle. When I searched that one, the article that popped up was only a few months old. A drowning in a lake. Not far from where we were. I slowly lowered the phone. The water behind the restaurant suddenly felt darker. Leela was walking a few steps ahead of me along the dock. She turned back toward me with that same relaxed smile. For a second, I just stood there staring at her. Then my phone buzzed again. I hesitated before looking, but I checked it anyway. Another contact had appeared. This time the name made my stomach drop. It was my name. Just my first and last name sitting at the top of the list. No number. No details. Just like the others. I looked up slowly. Leela was still smiling at me. The lake behind her was completely still. That night, I went home early. I told her I wasn't feeling well. She seemed disappointed, but didn't question it. When I got home, I opened my contacts list again. My name was still there. Right under it was a new one. Leela Mercer. I searched that name too. There were no results. I thought first dates were supposed to be awkward but fun, a little clumsy, a lot of hope. Maybe a drink and a laugh. This one started normal, with coffee at a quiet cafe on a side street, the kind of place where no one notices you and the barista knows your name by the third visit. He seemed charming enough at first, a little intense but not in a bad way. We talked about movies, music, dumb online memes, nothing that screamed warning signs. I didn't notice the little things at first, like the way his eyes lingered on me too long when I laughed or the odd way he tilted his head when I said something personal, as if he were studying me. After coffee, he said he wanted to show me something he called his hobby. I didn't think much of it, assuming maybe some weird art collection or a strange hobby like sculpting or woodworking. Curiosity got the better of me. We walked to his apartment, a small cluttered space on the top floor of an old building, the kind of place where the floors creak and you get that smell of dust mixed with damp wood. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and I noticed the flickering light in the stairwell, but shrugged it off. It was an old building. He led me down a narrow corridor, past boxes stacked haphazardly and furniture draped in sheets. He pushed open a door at the end of the hall and gestured for me to follow. The first thing I noticed was the air itself, heavier, colder, like stepping into a cave that had been sealed for years, and then I saw them. Mannequins. Dozens of them. Lined up in rows, dressed in clothes that looked disturbingly lifelike. Dresses, blouses, skirts, coats, shoes. Some were frozen mid-laugh, mouths open as if someone had snapped a photo at the perfect moment. Eyes wide, heads tilted just slightly. The skin was almost translucent, the hair carefully styled. Every single one was a woman, and the worst part, the part that made my stomach knot, was that they all looked eerily familiar. Not just vaguely familiar like people you pass on the street, but familiar in a way that made my teeth ache. I couldn't place them at first, and then it hit me. They looked like past dates, faces I had heard him mention casually, names he had said in conversation months ago, women he had met in bars, coffee shops, online. Somehow he had them all here, frozen forever. My body wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. My mind tried to convince me it was a joke, a bizarre obsession, some twisted art project, but the way the mannequin's eyes seemed to follow me made it impossible to believe it was harmless. The smiles, frozen mid-expression, were not welcoming. They were waiting, anticipating. He moved closer, stepping between the rows, brushing a hand against the shoulder of a mannequin dressed in a red dress, the lips parted in a laugh that would never finish. He whispered that he hoped I would be the last one he had to add. The words hit me like a blow, cold and precise, stripping away any remaining rational thought. I stumbled back, feeling the walls close in, the mannequin's painted eyes boring into me, judging me, measuring me. The basement seemed to stretch on forever, more mannequins than I could count, arranged like a silent audience. The smell of old fabric, faint perfume, and dust filled my nostrils. I realized that every step I took made no sound, as if the basement had absorbed the ordinary physics of life. The way he moved among the mannequins, calm, deliberate, made my skin crawl. It was almost like watching a conductor with his orchestra, except the orchestra was a gallery of frozen women, and I was suddenly the solo instrument he intended to play. My heart pounded, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I tried to force my body to move to escape, but my mind kept replaying the image of the mannequins, the open mouths, the frozen laughter. They weren't just models, I realized with horror. They were real ones, and somehow he had taken them from life to this state of eternal performance. The thought made me dizzy, and I pressed my hand against the cold concrete wall for support. He came closer, his eyes not leaving mine, and I felt the weight of his intent. The basement wasn't just a collection. It was a timeline, a record of his obsession, each mannequin a monument to someone who had existed and then been trapped in his hobby. The idea that I could end up like them, frozen in time and memory, made the room spin. Every instinct screamed at me to scream, to run, to fight, to throw something. But the basement seemed to absorb all attempts at escape. The mannequins watched. He watched. I realized that if I moved too fast, said the wrong thing, I might become one of them. I inched backward, tracing a line along the wall, counting doors, looking for exits, trying to measure the distance between me and freedom. The air felt heavier with every breath. The mannequins seemed to lean forward slightly as I moved, though their bodies didn't bend. Their faces just shifted subtly in the corner of my vision, a trick of light or something worse. He smiled, a small, calm smile that made my stomach twist, and leaned closer to me. The whisper of his voice, though his lips barely moved, was impossible to ignore. He said again, just above my ear, that he hoped I would be the last. The words didn't echo in the basement. They resonated in my head, vibrating against my skull, pressing against the logic and reasoning I tried to hold on to. I realized I had been standing still too long. He was moving toward me slowly, methodically, as if this were a game of chess, and the basement was the board. The mannequins, the frozen women, were pieces, and I was the next to be moved, trapped, sacrificed to complete the arrangement he had been building for years. Panic clawed at me, but fear and disbelief had slowed my reaction. My limbs felt alien, heavy, as if they belonged to someone else. I backed into a corner, my fingers brushing a mannequin that looked disturbingly alive in the dim light. I felt its plastic shoulder give slightly under pressure, and my stomach dropped. These weren't just mannequins. The realization came slowly and painfully. They were once human, and he had taken them in ways I couldn't fully comprehend, and now the basement held their stillness like a tomb. The thought that I could end up like them, suspended mid-laugh, trapped forever, made my mind scream internally. He stepped closer, and I finally found my voice. My words caught in my throat. The basement seemed to absorb any sound I made, leaving only the whisper of his presence and the silence of the mannequins. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the raised platform where another row of women stood, their faces eerily familiar, each expression a snapshot of a stolen moment. I realized that even though the basement was dim, I could see their eyes clearly, each staring with accusation, pleading, warning. My hand found the door handle, cold metal against my palm. I yanked it open and bolted, heart hammering, lungs screaming, leaving him in the basement behind. The stairwell was steep and smelled of mold and damp concrete. Every step I took felt heavy, weighted with the memory of the basement, of the women frozen mid-laugh of him, and that smile that promised something worse than death. I stumbled into the street, gasping for air, the city lights harsh and bright, like a revelation I wasn't ready to face. The night felt impossibly loud, every sound amplified. The world seemed normal again, mundane, as if the basement had been a layer of reality removed temporarily, just to show me what existed beneath. The fear lingered in my chest, a cold, solid thing that wouldn't leave. I never contacted him again, never returned to that side of town, but sometimes in quiet moments I swear I can see them. Mannequins in windows, faces frozen mid-laugh, familiar expressions that shouldn't exist outside that basement. The memory of his words echoes in my head. He hoped I would be the last one he had to add. And I can't stop thinking about what he meant by the last.